Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Robert Riley's key turned in the lock, the soft click echoing through the silent foyer of his lavish mansion. The 45-year-old executive's brow furrowed as he stepped inside, the absence of his wife Letitia immediately apparent. "Letitia," he called out, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. No response. He dropped his suitcase by the door, his eyes scanning the immaculate living room. Something was off. A tie not his was draped carelessly over the back of an armchair. He picked it up, bringing it to his nose. An unfamiliar cologne clung to the silk, musky and expensive. Robert's jaw clenched as he made his way through the house, noting small inconsistencies. A wine glass with a lipstick stain in the sink, a throw pillow out of place on the couch. Each detail added to the growing knot in his stomach. In the bedroom, he unpacked methodically, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone, dialing Letitia's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Nothing. With a growl of frustration, Robert began calling Letitia's friends. Each conversation left him more unsettled than the last. "Oh, Robert." Letitia mentioned something about a spa retreat. Sarah, her yoga buddy, said with a nervous laugh. 10 minutes later, Jennifer, another friend, told him, "I think she said something about visiting a sick aunt? I'm not sure the details." Their hesitation, the conflicting stories, it all reeked of deception. Robert's knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone, forcing his voice to remain calm as he thanked them and ended the calls. A methodical search of the house turned up nothing until he reached Letitia's vanity. Tucked away in a drawer, beneath a tangle of silk scarves, he found a receipt. His eyes narrowed as he read the itemized list: an outrageously expensive lingerie set, purchased on a date that coincided perfectly with his last business trip. The doorbell chimed, interrupting his dark thoughts. Robert composed himself before answering, finding Mrs. Rosalie Dawson, their 65-year-old neighbor, on the porch. "Mr. Riley, I'm so glad you're back," she said, wringing her hands. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know. There's been an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside your house several times this week, always when you're away." Robert's blood ran cold, but he managed a tight smile. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Dawson. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." As soon as he closed the door, Robert's calm facade crumbled. He stormed through the house, tearing through drawers and closets. In Letitia's study, hidden behind a row of untouched classics, he found a sleek, expensive burner phone. The device was password protected, a final barrier between Robert and the truth he already knew in his gut. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen, barely recognizing the hard-eyed stranger staring back at him. Robert's fingers flew across his phone's keypad, muscle memory dialing a number he rarely used but always kept close. "Tim? It's Robert. I need your help." No questions asked. Within an hour, Tim Stafford arrived, looking every bit the socially awkward IT genius he was. His arms were laden with equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie rather than a suburban home. "What's the situation, boss?" Tim asked, already setting up his laptop on the kitchen island. Robert's explanation was terse, stripped of emotion. He laid out the facts, the mysterious absences, the conflicting stories, the burner phone. Tim listened intently, nodding occasionally as his fingers flew over the keyboard. "We're going to turn this place into a digital fortress," Tim declared. "Every room, every angle. Nothing will escape our notice." They worked through the night, installing cutting-edge surveillance equipment throughout the house. Cameras in the bedroom, living areas, and all entry points. Microphones hidden in strategic locations. By dawn, Robert had access to a command center that would make intelligence agencies envious. As Tim packed up his gear, Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "I owe you one, Tim." The smaller man shook his head. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. We're even." He hesitated at the door. "Robert, whatever you find, be careful, okay?" Robert's smile was cold. Always am, Tim. Always am. Alone again, Robert set his plan in motion. He crafted a convincing story about an emergency business meeting in Tokyo, complete with hastily booked flights and a hotel reservation. When he texted Letitia the news, her response was almost instantaneous, a flurry of concerned emojis and promises to hold down the fort. When Letitia returned home, Robert watched her on the newly installed cameras. He noted the fleeting look of relief that crossed her face at the mention of his impending trip. It vanished quickly, replaced by a well-practiced expression of wifely concern. As Robert pretended to pack, he caught Letitia slipping into the garden, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was too low to make out the words, but her body language spoke volumes. Furtive glances, nervous gestures. When she noticed him watching from the window, she ended the call abruptly, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Robert kissed her goodbye, the act of tenderness feeling like ash in his mouth. He drove to the airport, parked his car in long-term parking, and took a cab to a nondescript hotel on the outskirts of town. The room was bland, forgettable. Perfect. He set up his laptop, linking to the surveillance feed. And then Robert Riley settled in to watch his marriage implode. The hotel room clock read 9:47 p.m. when headlights swept across the front of the house on Robert's laptop screen. He leaned forward, every muscle in his body coiled tight as a spring. A sleek black SUV matching Mrs. Dawson's description perfectly pulled into the driveway. The driver's door opened, and Robert's world crumbled. Santiago Lutz stepped out, his confident stride unmistakable even in the grainy footage. Robert's longtime business rival, the man who'd tried to undercut him at every turn for over a decade. But Santiago wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the vehicle: Andre Ackerman and Herbert Stark. Robert recognized them instantly as Santiago's most trusted associates. All three men cut imposing figures, their expensive suits doing little to hide their athletic builds. Robert's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated attack on everything he held dear. The front door opened before they could knock. Letitia stood framed in the doorway, a vision in red lace that made Robert's stomach churn. It was the lingerie set from the receipt, he realized with a sickening lurch. She bought it for them. For this debauchery. He watched, bile rising in his throat, as his wife welcomed the three men with the enthusiasm of a long-lost lover. No, not lover. Lovers. Plural. What unfolded over the next few hours seared itself into Robert's brain. The sounds of ecstasy, the tangle of limbs, the utter betrayal of every vow they'd ever made. He forced himself to keep watching, to document every sordid detail. This wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. This was about burning away any lingering shred of affection or trust. As the night wore on, Robert's initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating anger. He listened as they made plans for future rendezvous, always carefully timed to coincide with his business trips. This wasn't a one-time indiscretion. This was a well-oiled machine, a conspiracy designed to cuckold him in his own home. Next Friday works perfectly, Letitia purred, running her fingers through Santiago's hair. Robert has that conference in Chicago. Santiago chuckled, a sound that set Robert's teeth on edge. Excellent. I'll bring the champagne. You supply the entertainment. By the time dawn broke, Robert Riley was a changed man. The successful but ultimately trusting husband was dead, replaced by something harder, colder, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain through merciless retribution. He checked out of the hotel, his movements precise and controlled. To anyone watching, he was just another businessman starting his day. They couldn't see the storm raging behind his eyes, the wheels of vengeance already turning in his mind. As he drove home, Robert's mind raced with possibilities. Santiago, Letitia, Andre, Herbert, they had no idea what was coming. But Robert did, and he would make sure that when he was done, they would wish they had never crossed Robert Riley. Robert Riley's fingers drummed a steady rhythm on his mahogany desk. his eyes fixed on the business card before him. Faith Montgomery, private investigator. He'd vetted her thoroughly, discreet, sharp, and with a reputation for getting results no matter the cost. Perfect. He dialed a number, his voice clipped and professional when she answered. Ms. Montgomery? Robert Riley. I have a job for you. It's delicate, it's complex, and it needs to be handled with the utmost discretion. Faith's response was equally businesslike. I understand, Mr. Riley. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss the details. An hour later, they sat in a nondescript cafe, well away from Robert's usual haunts. Faith was younger than he'd expected, barely 35, but her eyes held a hardness that spoke of experience beyond her years. Robert laid out the situation, his words precise and emotionless. He watched Faith's expression carefully, noting the slight widening of her eyes when he mentioned Santiago Lutz. Santiago Lutz, Faith mused, tapping her pen against her notepad. He's got a reputation in certain circles. Not all of it good. Robert leaned forward, his voice low and intense. I want everything, Miss Montgomery. Every skeleton in his closet, every dirty deal, every indiscretion. Leave no stone unturned. Faith nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Consider it done, Mr. Riley. I'll be in touch. Over the next few weeks, Robert threw himself into his work with a fervor that surprised even his most ambitious colleagues. To the outside world, he was a man on a mission to grow his empire. In reality, every move was calculated to bring Santiago's world crashing down around him. Faith's reports came in regularly, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies with suspiciously similar board members, a pattern of bribes and kickbacks that stretched back years. Robert pored over the information, meticulously connecting the dots. He worked late into the night, fueled by a combination of expensive scotch and cold fury. The Robert of a month ago would have balked at the idea of destroying a man's life and career. That Robert was dead, replaced by a creature of pure, ruthless ambition. Using an anonymous email account, Robert crafted a masterpiece of innuendo and partially revealed truths. Just enough to pique the interest of the SEC, not enough to show his full hand. He hit send with a smile, imagining the storm that was about to break over Santiago's head. In the office, Robert was the picture of professionalism. He outbid Santiago on a crucial contract with a smile and a handshake, all while imagining the look on his rival's face when it all came crashing down. Tough luck, Santiago, Robert said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Maybe next time, eh? Santiago's grip was too tight as they shook hands. Always a pleasure doing business with you, Robert. Give my best to Letitia, won't you? It took every ounce of Robert's self-control not to punch the smug bastard right there in the boardroom. The final piece of his plan fell into place at a charity gala. Robert had done his homework. He knew exactly which causes Gabriella Lutz, Santiago's wife, was passionate about. It was child's play to engineer a chance meeting by the champagne fountain. Gabriella was everything her husband wasn't: warm, genuine, with a quick wit that Robert found himself genuinely enjoying. He pushed away the pang of guilt that threatened to surface. This wasn't about Gabriella. She was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. It's so refreshing to meet someone who actually cares about these causes, Gabriella said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Sometimes I think half the people here are just for the free champagne and photo ops. Robert laughed, the sound almost foreign to his ears after weeks of determination. Well, I won't say no to good champagne, but you're right. There are more important things in life than the bottom line. As they parted ways, Robert couldn't help but notice the way Gabriella's eyes lingered on him. He filed the information away, another potential weapon in his arsenal. The SEC audit hit Santiago's company like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Robert watched from the sidelines, his face a mask of polite concern as the business world buzzed with speculation. Santiago's usual swagger was noticeably absent at the next industry event. His collar seemed too tight, his smile strained as he glad-handed his way through the crowd. Robert approached, armed with a flute of champagne and faux sympathy. "Rough time, Santiago?" he asked, his voice low enough that only they could hear. "These audits can be such a headache. If there's anything I can do to help." Santiago's eyes flashed with a mixture of suspicion and barely contained rage. "I don't need your help, Riley. This is nothing but a minor inconvenience. Will be cleared in no time." Robert raised his glass in a mock toast. "Of course." I never doubted it for a moment. As he turned away, Robert allowed himself a small, cold smile. The noose was tightening, and Santiago could feel it. At home, Letitia was becoming increasingly agitated. Robert caught her scrutinizing their bank statements, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Darling," she said one evening, her voice carefully neutral, "I've noticed some irregularities in our accounts. Is everything all right with the business?" Robert put on a show of concern, internally marveling at her audacity. The woman who had been bleeding their accounts dry for months now had the nerve to question him. "Oh, what kind of irregularities?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the statement. Letitia pointed to several large transfers. "They're substantial." Robert furrowed his brow, the picture of a concerned husband. You're right, that is odd. I'll have to speak with our accountant. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, dear. I don't know what I'd do without you watching out for us." The kiss he placed on her cheek felt like acid on his lips. As the weeks wore on, Robert noticed a change in Letitia's behavior. Her phone calls became more frantic, always taken in hushed tones behind closed doors. He didn't need to check the surveillance footage to know that her rendezvous with Santiago and his cronies had all but ceased. One particularly tense evening, Robert accidentally overheard a snippet of conversation as he passed by Letitia's study. "What do you mean you can't make it?" she hissed into the phone. "Andre, you promised. No, you don't understand. Robert's been asking questions about the accounts. I think he suspects something." Robert allowed himself a smile as he continued down the hallway. The rats were starting to abandon the sinking ship. His friendship with Gabriella was progressing nicely. They met for coffee under the guise of discussing charity work. But Robert could see the growing doubt in her eyes when she spoke of Santiago. "He's been so distant lately," Gabriella confided during one such meeting. "Always working late, barely speaking to me when he is home. I can't help but feel like he's hiding something." Robert reached out, placing a comforting hand over hers. "I'm sure it's just the stress of the audit. But Gabriella, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." The grateful smile she gave him almost made him feel guilty. Almost. The final nail in Santiago's coffin came in the form of a carefully curated photo leak. Robert had agonized over this move, knowing it would hurt Gabriella as much as Santiago. But in the end, his thirst for revenge won out. The photos hit the tabloids like a bomb. Santiago Lutz, respected businessman, caught in compromising positions with not one, but several women. None of them his wife, and notably, none of them Letitia. Robert had been careful about that he wasn't ready to show his full hand just yet. The business world exploded with scandal. Santiago's already shaky reputation crumbled. And in their lavish home, Gabriella Lutz stared at the headlines with tears in her eyes, reaching for her phone to call the one person she thought she could trust. Robert bided his time, watching as Letitia grew more frantic with each passing day. Her lovers had abandoned her. Her spending habits were under scrutiny, and her carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling around her. He chose his moment carefully. Letitia had just ended yet another tense phone call, her face pale and drawn as she paced the living room. Robert stepped in, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. "Rough day, dear?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Letitia whirled to face him, her eyes wide with poorly concealed panic. "Robert, I didn't hear you come in. It's nothing. Just some drama with the girls from the club." Robert nodded slowly, moving to pour himself a drink. The clink of ice against glass was the only sound for a long moment. Funny, he said finally. I could have sworn I heard Santiago's name mentioned. And Andre's. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't those Santiago Lutz's associates? Odd company for your club friends to keep, wouldn't you say? The color drained from Letitia's face. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have misheard. Robert took a slow sip of his scotch, savoring the burn as much as the fear growing in Letitia's eyes. Oh, I don't think I did. In fact, I think I've been hearing things quite clearly for some time now. The question is, Letitia, how long did you think you could keep this charade going? Letitia's demeanor changed in an instant, fear replaced by defensive anger. What are you implying, Robert? I've been nothing but faithful to you. A harsh laugh escaped Robert's lips. Faithful? Is that what you call fucking my business rival and his associates in our bed? Is that what you call draining our accounts to fund your little escapades? He pulled out his phone, queuing up the damning footage from that first night of surveillance. Letitia's face crumpled as she watched herself writhing in ecstasy, Santiago and his friends taking turns with her like she was nothing more than a toy to be passed around. How did you? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's voice was ice cold. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting, to see what was happening right under my nose? Letitia's shock quickly turned to anger. She drew herself up, eyes flashing. You were never here, always working, always on some business trip. What did you expect me to do? Sit at home like a good little wife? I expected you to honor our vows. Robert spat. I expected basic human decency and respect. Clearly, that was too much to ask. Letitia's lips curled into a sneer. Fine. You want a divorce? You've got one. I'll take you for everything you're worth, Robert. Half of everything we own is mine by law. For the first time since the confrontation began, Robert smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Oh, Leticia, you really should have paid more attention to the financial documents I asked you to sign last month. He pulled out a stack of papers from his briefcase. You see, our assets aren't quite as joint as you might think. And as for your little spending sprees, well, let's just say the paper trail leads directly back to you. Embezzlement is such an ugly word, isn't it? Letitia's face went from angry to terrified in the span of a heartbeat. You can't do this. I'll fight you. You'll what? Robert cut her off. Go to Santiago for help. I'm afraid he has his own problems to deal with right now. The SEC is quite interested in some of his business practices. Practices that, coincidentally, you seem to have some knowledge of, given the nature of your pillow talk. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Face it, Letitia. It's over. You played a dangerous game and you lost. I'd start packing if I were you. The locks will be changed by morning. As Robert turned to leave, Letitia's voice stopped him. How long? She asked, her voice small and defeated. How long have you known? Robert paused at the door, not bothering to turn around. Long enough to make sure that when I was done, you'd have nothing left. Not money, not reputation, not even the man you threw away our marriage for. Goodbye, Letitia. I'd say it's been a pleasure, but we both know that would be a lie. The door closed behind him with a final, devastating click. In the silent aftermath, Letitia sank to her knees, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. And in his study, Robert Riley poured himself another drink, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction before turning his attention to the next phase of his plan. Santiago Lutz wouldn't know what hit him. Letitia's manicured nails drummed an erratic rhythm on the polished surface of Santiago's desk. Her eyes, once sparkling with mischief and desire, now held the desperate gleam of a cornered animal. We have to do something, Santiago, she hissed, her voice raw with panic. Robert knows everything. He's going to destroy us both. Santiago Lutz, the once imposing business tycoon, looked a shadow of his former self. Dark circles marred the skin under his eyes, and a slight tremor in his hands betrayed the strain of the past weeks. Calm down, Letitia, he snapped, though his own voice lacked its usual confidence. Panicking won't solve anything. We need a plan. Letitia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if we made people think Robert was losing it? You know, mentally unstable? Santiago's eyes narrowed, a spark of his old cunning flaring to life. Go on. Think about it. Letitia pressed, warming to her theme. If everyone believes Robert's gone off the deep end, anything he says about us will be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. A slow, cruel smile spread across Santiago's face. Letitia, my dear, I always said you were more than just a pretty face. They spent the next hour plotting, their heads bent close together over Santiago's desk. By the time Letitia left, a plan had taken shape, a desperate, ruthless gambit to salvage their reputations and discredit Robert Riley once and for all. Santiago wasted no time putting their scheme into action. He reached out to his media contacts, calling in favors and making thinly veiled threats where necessary. Within days, the first whispers began to circulate. Did you hear about Robert Riley? I heard he had some kind of breakdown at the office. My cousin's friend works for him, says he's been acting really paranoid lately. The rumors spread like wildfire, each retelling adding new, lurid details. Robert's alleged erratic behavior and paranoid delusions became the talk of the business world, with speculation running rampant about the cause of his supposed mental decline. Meanwhile, Letitia and Santiago weren't content to rely solely on rumor and innuendo. They needed hard evidence to back up their claims, something that would irreparably damage Robert's credibility. We need to get into his accounts, Letitia insisted during one of their clandestine meetings. There has to be something we can use against him. Santiago nodded, already pulling out his phone. I know a guy, hacker, best in the business. If there's dirt to be found, he'll find it. What neither of them realized was that they were playing right into Robert's hands. The cybersecurity measures Tim had put in place were far beyond anything their hired hacker had ever encountered. Every attempt to breach Robert's defenses not only failed, but left a clear trail, leading right back to Santiago and Letitia. Frustrated by their lack of progress and growing increasingly desperate, Letitia decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to Julie Brock, Robert's ex-girlfriend from before their marriage. The cafe Letitia chose for their meeting was deliberately nondescript, the kind of place that discouraged lingering glances or eavesdropping. Julie arrived precisely on time, her face a mask of polite curiosity. Thank you for meeting me, Julie. Letitia began, her voice honey-sweet. I'm worried about Robert, and I hoped you might be able to help. Julie's eyebrow arched skeptically. Oh, and how exactly am I supposed to do that? Letitia leaned in, dropping all pretense of friendliness. Cut the act. You dated Robert for what? 2 years? There must be something you know, something we can use to show he's not as stable as he pretends to be. Julie's laugh was sharp and without humor. Let me get this straight. You want me to help you destroy the reputation of a man I once cared deeply for, all to save your own skin. She stood, gathering her purse. I think we're done here. As Julie walked away, Letitia felt the last threads of her plan unraveling. She didn't notice the small smile playing at the corners of Julie's mouth, or the way her hand moved to her pocket, where a recording device had captured every damning word. Across town, Santiago was making his own desperate play. He had arranged a meeting with Tim Stafford, Robert's loyal IT expert, at an upscale bar known for its discretion. Mr. Stafford, Santiago greeted, all oily charm and forced camaraderie. Thank you for meeting me. Can I get you a drink? Tim's face remained impassive. I'll pass, thanks. What's this about, Mr. Lutz? Santiago's smile faltered slightly at Tim's cool demeanor. He pressed on regardless. I'll be blunt, Mr. Stafford. I'm concerned about Robert. His behavior lately has been erratic. As his friend and colleague, I'm sure you've noticed it too. Tim said nothing, his silence forcing Santiago to fill the void. I'm prepared to make it worth your while. Santiago continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. $500,000. All you have to do is testify about Robert's unstable behavior at work. For his own good, you understand. The silence stretched between them, Santiago's forced smile growing strained. Finally, Tim spoke. Are you finished, Mr. Lutz? Santiago blinked, thrown off balance. What? Tim stood, his voice cold. Because if you are, I'd like to say this. Robert Riley is 10 times the man you'll ever be. He gave me a chance when no one else would, and I'd sooner cut off my own hand than betray him. He leaned in close, his next words barely above a whisper. Oh, and in case you're wondering, this entire conversation has been recorded. I'm sure Robert will be very interested to hear it. As Tim walked away, leaving a shell-shocked Santiago in his wake, the last pillars of the plan to discredit Robert came crashing down. Unbeknownst to either Santiago or Letitia, their desperate attempts to save themselves had only served to seal their own fates. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from every major network and publication jostled for position. Cameras at the ready. The air crackled with the electric tension that precedes a major story. At precisely 2 p.m., Robert Riley strode onto the small stage. He looked every inch the successful businessman, impeccably tailored suit, not a hair out of place. But there was something in his eyes, a steely determination that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, his voice steady and clear. I've called this press conference to address the recent rumors concerning my mental health and business practices. A susurrus of whispers swept through the room. In the back, Santiago Lutz shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. I'm aware that there have been questions about my stability, Robert continued. Allegations of erratic behavior, paranoid delusions. I'm here today to put those rumors to rest. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. But first, I'd like to present some information that I think you'll find illuminating. With a nod to an assistant, a series of documents appeared on the large screen behind him. Bank statements, emails, surveillance photos, a damning tapestry of evidence pointing to years of fraudulent business practices. What you're looking at, Robert explained, his voice taking on an edge of steel, is proof of a complex money laundering scheme orchestrated by none other than Santiago Lutz. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. In the back, Santiago's face had gone ashen. Robert held up a hand, quieting the crowd. I understand you have questions about my mental state. Allow me to address those concerns. He produced a stack of papers, holding them up for the cameras. I have here sworn statements from my colleagues, medical evaluations from top psychiatrists, and video evidence showcasing my competency and the calculated nature of my recent actions. As Robert systematically dismantled every allegation against him, Santiago felt the noose tightening. He edged towards the door, only to find his path blocked by 2 stern-faced security guards. But Robert wasn't finished. I'd like to invite a special guest to join me on stage. Julie Brock, if you would. Julie emerged from the wings, her head held high. Santiago's eyes widened in recognition. The ex-girlfriend Letitia had tried to turn against Robert. Ms. Brock has been working with me to uncover the truth, Robert explained. She has evidence that will put to rest any lingering doubts about the nature of these false allegations against me. Julie stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering as she recounted her meeting with Letitia, playing the damning recording for all to hear. The final blow came with another gesture from Robert. There's one more person I'd like you all to hear from. Gabriella Lutz, Santiago's wife, walked onto the stage. Her face was a mask of composure, but her eyes blazed with a mixture of pain and fury. Gabriella, Robert said gently, I'm sorry to have to do this, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. He handed her a folder. These are photos and records detailing your husband's multiple affairs, including his relationship with my soon-to-be ex-wife, Letitia. Gabriella's hands shook as she looked through the contents. When she lifted her head, her voice was steel. "I'd like to make a statement," she said, facing the sea of cameras. "I am hereby announcing my intention to file for divorce from Santiago Lutz. Furthermore, I fully support any investigation into his business practices." The press conference ended in a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. As security led a shell-shocked Santiago away in handcuffs, Robert made one final announcement. "In light of recent events, I've decided to donate a significant portion of my assets to a charity supporting victims of fraud and infidelity. It's my hope that some good can come from this unfortunate situation." The room erupted in applause, Robert's masterful performance leaving no doubt as to who had emerged victorious in this high-stakes game. The consequences of Robert's revelation rippled through the business world like a tsunami. Within hours, Santiago Lutz found himself in a stark interrogation room, the weight of his crimes pressing down on him like a physical force. His high-priced lawyers, usually so confident and commanding, looked as if they'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their faces grave. "Mr. Lutz, the evidence against you is overwhelming," the lead attorney said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Given the circumstances, we strongly advise you to consider a plea deal." Santiago's world had narrowed to this moment. The realization that his empire of lies and fraud was crumbling around him. He nodded numbly, the fight gone out of him. "Do what you have to do," he muttered. Across town, Letitia faced her own reckoning. She stood in the foyer of what had once been her home, a single suitcase at her feet. The locks had already been changed, a final, irrevocable sign that her life of luxury was over. Her phone buzzed incessantly calls from so-called friends, no doubt eager to distance themselves from the scandal. She ignored them all, knowing that her social circle had contracted to a cold, empty void. With nowhere else to go, Letitia found herself in a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town. The kind of place she would have turned her nose up at just days ago. Now, it was all she could afford, as she sat on a lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained walls. The full weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had gambled everything, her marriage, her reputation, her future, and lost it all in spectacular fashion. Meanwhile, Andre and Herbert, Santiago's once loyal associates, were scrambling to save themselves. They'd seen the writing on the wall and wasted no time in turning state's evidence. In sterile interrogation rooms, they spilled every secret, every shady deal, every whispered conversation. Their testimonies were a final nail in Santiago's coffin, revealing the true extent of his criminal network. Gabriella Lutz, shell-shocked but resilient, threw herself into the divorce proceedings with determination. She wanted nothing more to do with the man she had once loved, the man who had betrayed her so completely. In a moment of vulnerability, she reached out to the one person who had shown her true kindness throughout this ordeal. "Robert," her voice wavered slightly over the phone. I just wanted to thank you for telling me the truth, as painful as it was." Robert's response was gentle, understanding. "You deserve to know, Gabriella. I'm just sorry it had to be this way." A pause, pregnant with possibility. "Perhaps, when the dust settles, we could get coffee sometime?" In his office, Robert allowed himself a small smile. "I'd like that, Gabriella. I'd like that very much." As the days turned to weeks, Robert watched with satisfaction as the pieces fell into place. His divorce from Letitia was settled swiftly and decisively in his favor. Santiago Lutz, once the titan of industry, was reduced to a jumpsuit-clad defendant, his empire dismantled brick by brick. To the outside world, Robert Riley was the picture of triumph, the wronged husband who had exposed a web of deceit and emerged stronger for it. His donation to the charity for victims of fraud and infidelity was lauded in the press, his reputation not just salvaged but burnished to a high shine. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras were gone and the accolades faded, Robert felt something. Not regret, certainly. He would make the same choices again in a heartbeat. But a weight, perhaps. the knowledge that he had looked into the abyss of human nature and not flinched away. It was this feeling that led him to the offices of Dr. Perry Dawson, renowned psychiatrist, not out of any sense of guilt or need for absolution, but out of a pragmatic desire to process his experiences and move forward. "Mr. Riley," Dr. Dawson greeted him, his voice neutral and professional. "What brings you here today?" Robert settled into the leather armchair, his posture relaxed but alert. "Doctor, I've just dismantled the lives of several people who betrayed me. I don't regret it for a moment, but I find myself curious about the experience, about my own reactions to it." Dr. Dawson nodded, his pen poised over a notepad. "I see. And how would you characterize those reactions?" A thoughtful pause. Satisfaction, certainly. A sense of justice served. But also a certain coldness. A distance from the person I used to be. "And how do you feel about that distance?" Robert's smile was sharp, devoid of warmth. "I think, doctor, that's what I'm here to figure out." As the session continued, Robert Riley began the process of examining the man he had become, not with any desire to change or soften the hard edges he had developed, but to understand them, to hone them. Outside the window, the city bustled on, unaware of the quiet reckoning taking place within the confines of Dr. Dawson's office. Robert Riley, the man who had looked betrayal in the eye and emerged victorious, was charting his course for the future. A future where he would never again be the trusting fool, but the master of his own destiny.
Husband discovers wife cheating, uncovers her ongoing affair, exposes the truth, and files for divorce. Mark, weighing 325 lbs, and Sarah, having lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about Mark's health. In short, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, Mark shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 lbs, but contemplated quitting after losing 118 lbs. After all, the journey had been arduous. When Mark expressed his desire to quit, Sarah adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story. If Mark quit, he would only receive closeness 4 times a year, prompting Sarah to seek fulfillment elsewhere due to her lovemaking needs. In the moments following Sarah's threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when Mark's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked as she witnessed sadness and hurt in his eyes as a result of her words. The marriage's foundation crumbled, as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Sarah realized immediately that she had made a critical mistake. Sarah had pushed her beloved man to his limits to fulfill her desires for weight loss, then threatened infidelity as punishment. She questioned her own actions, realizing the impact on Mark. Mark expressed frustration, emphasizing the tremendous effort he had put into losing over 100 lbs for Sarah's sake. He accused her of using closeness as a tool to manipulate him, expressing disappointment at her reward of continued deprivation and potential infidelity. Mark believed Sarah had jeopardized their marriage, introducing chaos into their home. He questioned her trustworthiness and speculated about her thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, he felt Sarah had ruined their marriage, leaving him uncertain about what to believe. Sarah expressed regret, insisting that she never intended to engage in infidelity. Despite her plea, Mark, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation and a few minutes later left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to contemplate the situation. In the garage, Mark declared his need for time to think, leaving Sarah in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt planted in Mark's mind and understanding the challenge of dispelling it. Reflecting on her actions, Sarah admitted her lack of consideration for Mark's feelings. She acknowledged her greed and desire for more, despite Mark's previous efforts. Now she recognized the need to regain what she had lost. Mark, spending about an hour in the garage, engaged in activities to occupy his hands while contemplating the complexities of the situation. He didn't really think his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but he wasn't sure. Earlier in the day, he would have been sure, but now, after her comment, he just couldn't be sure anymore. He didn't know either if she would have cheated on him in the future. Earlier, he would have never believed it, but now he wasn't sure anymore. He said out loud, "I need to find out." Mark walked back into the house. Sarah remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed, with red eyes and a red nose, a result of her recent tears. Mark observed her condition, feeling a sense of regret, yet he remained resolute in carrying out his decision. He communicated to Sarah his decision to abandon the diet, informing her that he would restrict their carnal moments to the previously agreed upon 4 times a year, or even none at all, leaving the choice to her discretion. Mark warned of severe consequences if she chose to engage in relations with someone else, expressing his intent to inflict physical damage on her potential lover. Mark sternly addressed Sarah, asserting that any infidelity on her part would lead to an immediate end of their relationship. He emphasized that he would not tolerate staying married to a cheater and labeled her as a fancy woman, indicating his lack of tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared his mistrust and announced his intention to closely monitor her actions, cautioning her to be exceedingly careful. Concluding his message, Mark mentioned his departure for a while, indicating his absence for lunch, but assuring his presence for dinner. He offered the option of ordering food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving the atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. Mark grabbed his car keys off the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Sarah heard the garage door open and she heard Mark's car drive away. Sarah said out loud, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. How could I be so stupid?" She began sobbing again and just sat there, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour or so later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then went and lay on her bed and cried some more. When Mark arrived home later that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like so many husbands who suspected his wife of cheating, Mark decided to do some detective work on his own. He thought the easiest way to start was to drive to the telephone providers and request a printout of call logs on their home phone and on his wife's cell phone. Both were in his name, so he knew he would not have any trouble getting the reports. The landline phone company told him he could have it electronically, and they were able to upload the call logs for the last 3 years onto a CD for him for a small fee. He gladly paid it and walked out of the office with everything he asked for. Yes, he requested 3 years because he wanted to be able to go back before he had started the diet, to see if there had been any motivation for Sarah cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company and requested identical data. They hesitated at first since it was his wife's cell phone number he wanted the data for, but Mark pointed out that it was indeed a joint account with his name prominently on the records, so they had no reason to withhold any information he might request. They offered the data electronically as well for a fee of $120. Mark thought it excessive, but probably worth the money so he could more easily access the information. He did make a note, though, that perhaps he would rethink his cell phone provider in the future. Arriving at home around 4 p.m., Mark saw Sarah lying on their bed, sound asleep. He decided to let her sleep and went back to their home office, locking the office door so he would not be interrupted. He sat down at the computer and downloaded all of the data from the 2 CDs into a folder in his documents file. He had already formulated how he would conduct his search. He was going to start with 2 years ago and compile a list of every telephone number called in that first month when he started his diet and when Sarah had. Restricted his closeness to 4 times a year, plus rewards for goals achieved. That would have been September of 2008. On their home phone, September had 96 calls to 19 different numbers. He found that, using the format the phone company had provided for him, he could sort the data in a number of different ways, so he created a list by numbers, showing the number, the date, the time, and the duration of the call. Once he got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create that list for every call made from their home phone in the last 2 years. He was just about ready to start the same process on Sarah's cell phone data when he heard the office doorknob rattle. The door was locked, so no one could come in, so he saved everything he had been doing and stashed away all evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went and opened the door to find the most pitiful sight he could imagine. There stood Sarah in a seriously disheveled state, hair a mess, eyes and nose red from crying and sniffling every once in a while. She had her head bent down and only reluctantly looked up and into Mark's eyes. She expressed deep remorse to Mark, acknowledging the hurt and anger she caused. Sarah recognized her own selfish and cruel actions, admitting that she overstepped by interfering with his diet progress. She apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and acknowledging that the decision to continue the diet should have been solely his, despite feeling the overwhelming influence of the situation. She pleaded with Mark to forgive her. Mark conveyed his forgiveness to Sarah, emphasizing that it was granted only based on the information available to him at the moment. He expressed his love for her and reminded her of the sacrifices he made during the 2-year struggle with his weight, including abstaining from closeness, all done for her. However, he admitted that he had reached a breaking point and could no longer continue. Mark addressed the current situation, describing it as a gorilla in the room that needed to be addressed. He stressed the importance of knowing definitively whether or not she had cheated on him, as the uncertainty would drive him crazy. Mark outlined the conditions for their relationship moving forward, stating that if she had not cheated in the past and did not plan to in the future, they could be okay. However, he made it clear that he needed assurance. He held Sarah accountable for creating the mess with her hasty comment and threat, expressing his disbelief at her lack of consideration for his feelings and the damage it caused to his trust in her. Mark highlighted the need for her to deal with the consequences until he felt confident in their relationship. Sarah, who was hoping he would just forgive her and forget what she had said, thought, "I suppose I deserved everything that was happening to me, but I hoped it could all go away." She nodded her head slowly in resigned agreement and turned and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She lay on her bed again, not sobbing but with tears streaking her face. Mark opened the bedroom door and asked Sarah, "Do you want something to eat?" Sarah said, "No, Mark, I am not hungry." Mark walked out to his car and drove off again to a place nearby called Grisham's. He and Sarah had gone there for drinks many times, and their food was excellent. He knew he could have a few beers and a greasy but delicious bacon cheeseburger. In the 2 years previous, he had not had more than 2 beers in a week's time, and not 1 bacon cheeseburger. Tonight, he was going to give in and have what he wanted. He knew that he would never allow himself to get overweight like he had been before, but tonight, he was going to splurge and enjoy his dinner, even though his heart was breaking. When he got home, he went back to the office and began working on the call log from Sarah's cell phone. Because he already knew the drill, it was easier to finish the cell phone list, and he was done in half the time. After reviewing the 2 lists, Mark determined that over the course of 2 years, they had 3,482 calls made in total, from a total of 45 different telephone numbers. He decided to sort the calls by telephone number and had some surprising results. There were almost 300 calls to his cell phone, about 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar number of calls to Sarah's parents' number. There were close to that many to each of Sarah's sisters, and about half that number to his brother John. In addition, there was a scattering of calls to various friends whose numbers Mark recognized and a few to other numbers he didn't recognize. Going down the list, though, he discovered that there were over 200 calls to a number he didn't recognize, and another 50-plus calls to a second number he didn't recognize. Then he realized there were some calls, 30 or more, to additional numbers that were made over the course of 2 years. He assumed those might be hair salons, stores, church, etc. None of those statistics bothered Mark much, so he just noted them and went back to the 2 major unrecognizable numbers. Being the type of guy Mark was, he decided to refine his research a little more and sorted the calls by day and time for those 2 numbers. The surprising results gave him the chills, and almost immediately he was burning up with suspicion and anger. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., Mark attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant with meeting rooms. They convened in conference for an hour, took a 1-hour lunch break, and concluded their business by 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m., consistently every week at 10:55 a.m. Without fail, there was a call to him on his cell phone. Yes, some weeks were missed, but Mark instantly recognized those were the weeks he was on vacation. But the rule remained, every Wednesday at 10:55 a.m. and at 11:05 a.m. Every Wednesday a call was made to the first of the 2 numbers Mark didn't recognize. He was burning up now. It seemed too much of a coincidence not to be suspicious. Mark knew at that moment that what he was going to discover would not bring him joy. Persevering, he looked at the second number and quickly realized that these calls were consistently placed on Fridays. On Friday afternoons, once a month, Mark played golf with his brother and their best friends, finishing the 18 holes around 5:30 p.m. They would stop in the clubhouse for a couple of drinks before heading home, usually reaching home before 6:30 p.m. on those Fridays. He would shower and take Sarah out to eat. What angered him was that Sarah always called him just before he teed off to express her love and let him know she would be waiting when he finished his round and got home. Mark now understood what was going on, but he lacked visual proof or knowledge of the person with whom she was cheating. The scary part was wondering how long it had been going on and if it started only when Sarah cut him off or if it began earlier. So he extended his investigation another year and discovered that the same calls were made once a month for the 3 months before he was cut off. Whatever Sarah was doing, she had been doing it 3 months earlier, but not as frequently. All he had to do now was figure out who and then decide what he was going to do about it. Mark thought finding out who would be easy. He ran a reverse lookup on the first number and found it to be a cell phone number not listed. He ran the reverse lookup on the second number and discovered it was listed to a Tony Bali. Of course, Mark knew exactly who Tony BT he was. He was Mark's trainer at the gym. Sarah had initially found him for Mark, so Sarah was calling Tony on the Fridays when Mark golfed. Mark thought. He noted the address in his call log spreadsheet and decided to go out again for a while. Upon returning to Grisham's, Mark had a couple more beers. When things quieted down after the dinner rush, he approached the rather attractive bartender, Brenda, seeking help. He briefly explained the situation and requested Brenda to determine if the first number belonged to Tony. He dialed the number and instructed Brenda to ask for Tony, and if it was him, to mention that a woman had given her the number as a potential trainer. If it was Tony, she should tell him that if he had openings, she would stop by the gym one of these days. Brenda, after taking the phone, inquired if the person on the other end was Tony. She explained that she was Jennifer, a woman she didn't know, who had received Tony's name from someone at her hair salon. The suggestion was made during a conversation about getting in better shape. Jennifer provided some personal details, mentioning her age, 24, height, 5 feet 6 inches, and current weight, around 130 lbs. Despite feeling a bit scrutinized over the phone, she acknowledged that she could improve her fitness and happiness by reaching a weight of around 115 lbs. Expressing gratitude for the compliment, Jennifer inquired about Tony's availability. Upon learning that an opening had recently become available due to a client quitting, she expressed her interest. Jennifer indicated her intention to visit Tony in a couple of days to discuss the necessary steps to achieve her fitness goals. She thanked Tony and concluded the conversation, looking forward to meeting him soon. Mark sat there in amazement at what Brenda just did. She verified that it was Tony from the gym and discovered that, indeed, he did smack on women who used him as a trainer. She even verified that he had an opening because of a dropout. Mark thought that dropout had to be him. Damn, Sarah already called Tony to tell him what happened and to warn him to be ultra careful. The funny thing, though, as he sat there feeling lower than dirt, was the humor in what Brenda had said. He didn't know or care how much she actually weighed. She was hot just like she was. She didn't need to lose an ounce anywhere. Mark smiled at her and told her she was too funny and that he thought she was perfect the way she was, so she better stay away from Tony. He said, "No one could have a more perfect body than you do, Brenda." Brenda responded to Mark's compliment with a beautiful smile, expressing gratitude and addressing him as a kind sir. She acknowledged Mark's attractiveness, describing him as a hunk and expressing confusion about why his wife would seek companionship elsewhere. Mark, reciprocating the smile, acknowledged Brenda's words. Mark admitted that 2 years ago he might not have been considered a hunk, but he firmly stated that it didn't justify his wife's act of cheating. He thanked Brenda for her assistance, both in gathering information about Tony and boosting his deflated ego. Mark expressed his appreciation and mentioned that he should head home. He thanked Brenda once more for her support and understanding. Mark went home, and because it was late, he just went to bed. As he crawled into bed, he looked across at Sarah and was hit with a feeling of loss and disappointment. He didn't think he had ever been this low in his life, but he was also certain that before it was all over he would feel even worse. Sarah had awakened slightly when he crawled in and said, "I love you, Mark." Mark just grunted at that and turned away from her, trying to sleep. Of course, he couldn't get to sleep right away and just lay there thinking for quite a while. He was certain that he heard a sob or two from Sarah, but she obviously had calmed down somewhat. In the morning, Mark woke up to find Sarah spooned against him, her body pressing into his back. Sensing his arousal, she reached around and placed her hand on him. Expressing remorse for her previous words and requesting closeness, Mark, aware of his vulnerability, resisted the temptation, citing the need to get going that morning and the established boundaries. Mark reminded Sarah of the cutoff he had communicated earlier, emphasizing that such attempts should not be repeated. He left the bed, showered, and headed to work. Sarah, left alone, muttered to herself about deserving the consequences of her words and the accompanying emotional pain. Upon reaching work, Mark confided in his boss about the issues at home, briefly explaining the situation and receiving support. The boss advised him to take any necessary time off to address his suspicions. Mark's boss also provided the name of a reputable electronics distributor for surveillance equipment. Expressing gratitude, Mark informed his boss that he would be taking time off from Wednesday through Friday, planning to pursue his suspicions. The boss, understanding Mark's intentions, wished him good luck with a smile. Mark went to the electronics distributor's location and found out that his boss had called ahead and instructed them to assist him with whatever he needed. Visual evidence seemed challenging for him, but he felt recording was manageable. He acquired 3 top-of-the-line bugs with battery life sufficient to transmit many hours of activity to a receiver within a couple of city blocks when the operator downloaded the data. When Mark got home, A special dinner awaited him on the table, his favorite lasagna with garlic bread and sweet green peas. He thanked Sarah for the wonderful meal and excused himself to go and watch some television. Sarah cleaned up the kitchen and joined him in the TV room, being cautious not to push in too close. At bedtime, she headed to their bedroom, giving Mark the chance to plant one of the bugs inside their home phone, ensuring a complete record of every conversation on that phone. Both parties in the conversation would be heard. Though nervous about bugging Sarah's cell phone, he decided to proceed without worrying too much. It only took a few minutes, and he was done. Now he had a source of information from either phone. The challenging part Mark faced was planting a bug in Tony's phone. While Mark already had bugs on Sarah's phones, he considered the possibility that she might use a different phone, such as a payphone, to communicate with Tony. To cover all bases, Mark decided to try bugging Tony's phone, recalling that Tony worked closely with a well-built blonde woman on Wednesday mornings. Mark suspected their interactions and felt the need to gather more information. He planned to seize the opportunity when Tony was preoccupied with the blonde woman to discreetly install the bug. Mark envisioned Tony being so engrossed with the blonde woman that he wouldn't notice Mark's actions. He went to the gym and saw Tony's phone sitting on his towel about 10:50. From where Tony was with the blonde, it would be risky to get the phone, but he thought, what the hell do I have to lose? He snuck in, slipped the phone into his pocket, backed out of the gym, and went into the men's room. There, he easily inserted the bug into Tony's phone. The tricky part would be getting the phone back on the towel. When he returned to the gym, he could see that Tony was wrapping it up with the blonde. He knew he would never make it to the towel and back without being spotted. Damn, he thought. How am I going to do this? After a few seconds, he decided to try to slide the phone across the floor to the towel, hoping to get it close enough so Tony wouldn't be suspicious. It involved some risk, but he went ahead and slid the phone. Despite making some noise, Tony, engrossed in the blonde, remained oblivious. Fortunately, he slid it forcefully enough for it to reach the towel, hitting it hard and sliding underneath. It was perfect. Mark believed there was no way Tony could be suspicious now, so he swiftly left the gym. At precisely 10:55 a.m., his cell phone rang. It was Sarah. She said she wanted to touch base before his meeting. Of course, Mark never disclosed that he was off work the rest of the week, let alone skipping the meeting. After about 10 minutes, Mark began monitoring the bugs using the receiver from his car. Tony's phone rang and he picked up quickly. Tony greeted Sarah, asking if she wanted to meet at his house as usual. Sarah expressed caution, stating Mark was highly suspicious and they might need to quit meeting for a while to avoid trouble. Tony grumbled, reluctant to give up their encounters. Mark groaned as he heard Sarah's response. Acknowledging the risk, she admitted that the first time they had closeness, she knew she'd do anything to be with him. She, initially, cut Mark off to enjoy their time more with Tony. Though she loved him, she couldn't take the chance now. She suggested they might resume their weekly encounters in a few weeks. But in the meantime, Tony would have to be content with one of his other girlfriends. Sarah wasn't jealous of Tony's other relationships and proposed considering meeting on the Fridays Mark went golfing. She needed time to think about it and promised to let Tony know if it could work out. Mark had suffered enough, making him sick and angry. He was determined to get revenge. Having endured Tony's advances even before he started the diet, she had used the diet as an excuse to enhance her encounters with Tony for the past 2.5 years. Sarah had been meeting with Tony every Wednesday and on the monthly golfing Fridays, totaling over 100 encounters. Mark questioned how she could claim to love him while engaging in such behavior and speculated about the possibility of other involvements. Regardless, Tony's involvement alone was enough for Mark to decide on revenge against both of them. Over the next 2 days, he devised plans, established contacts, and ensured favorable conditions for the weekend. Monitoring phone taps, Mark discovered that Sarah had arranged a beautician appointment for Friday morning. In a conversation on Thursday, in the conversation with her beautician, Janine, Sarah explained her desire for a new and sexy hairstyle to distract Mark from suspicions of infidelity. She mentioned the intention to purchase provocative lingerie to further divert his attention. When asked about Tony, Sarah admitted she might temporarily reduce their encounters but laughed it off, suggesting it wasn't a permanent decision. Despite the laughter, Mark felt devastated by the revelations, yet his anger began to drive him, burying the hurt deep inside. Tony initiated contact on Friday, proposing an immediate rendezvous with Sarah. She expressed her intense desire but conveyed her reluctance due to the risk involved, asking for patience until Mark's suspicions subsided. With each conversation, Mark's heartbreak deepened. Struggling to comprehend any love in their relationship, he perceived Sarah's actions as purely selfish, devoid of concern or respect for him. Mark pondered where things had gone wrong but remained determined to carry out his revenge. On Saturday, after lunch, the doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find Brenda, who introduced herself as a friend of Mark's. Brenda mentioned Mark's approval for her to spend time by the pool. Sarah, taken aback, agreed to show her to the pool. However, Brenda noticed Sarah's lack of a smile, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. Shortly after, Sally and Linda arrived, both informing Sarah that Mark had invited them to use the pool. They shared their connections with Mark, Sally having worked with him for years, and Linda having served them at Grisham's. Sarah, confronted with the presence of three attractive women, began to feel uneasy, contemplating various possibilities. The three women settled on chaise lounge chairs, applying suntan lotion to themselves. It didn't take them long to agree to apply sunscreen to each other to ensure they didn't miss any spots. Once they were thoroughly coated, they lay on the loungers and began soaking in the sun. Shortly afterward, they decided an all-over tan would be better. Each woman untied the strings on their bikini tops and dropped them on the towel beside the lounger. Sarah was upset and wanted to ask them to leave, but since Mark had invited them, she had to tread lightly, knowing she was already on thin ice with him. At 3:30 p.m., Brenda approached Sarah and took a seat, revealing that she worked as a bartender at Grisham's. She disclosed that on the night Sarah issued the ultimatum, Mark had stopped by for a few drinks and shared all the details about their situation. Sarah appeared startled, and Brenda expressed her belief that Sarah had made a significant mistake. Continuing, Brenda informed Sarah that Mark was now suspicious and actively investigating their situation. She conveyed Mark's warning to Sarah, stating that if he discovered past or future infidelity, he intended to be carnal with Brenda, Sally, and Linda for each instance of cheating. Sarah, shocked, attempted to respond, but Brenda interjected, adding that Mark also planned to question Sarah, and if she lied, he would be carnal with one of them for each lie. Brenda hinted that they found Mark attractive and were open to being carnal with him. Brenda, already aware of Sarah's past infidelity, anticipated Mark's carnal involvement with her. She also anticipated that Sarah, in an attempt to conceal her actions, would likely lie, leading to a busy time for Mark satisfying the three women. Sally joined Brenda and took a seat, sharing that she had known Mark for several years and always found him handsome and sweet. Despite his weight gain, she believed he remained the same sweet guy she had known. Sally admitted to having a crush on him, which had only intensified since he lost the excess weight. She acknowledged the troubles between Sarah and Mark and expressed her willingness to pursue a relationship with Mark, stating that he could have her anytime he wanted. Linda also chimed in, expressing that she had been observing Sarah and Mark for a couple of years. She noticed the love Mark showed for Sarah, and she made it clear that she had her eye on them. Linda's statement suggested her interest in Mark and her observation of their relationship dynamics. Linda acknowledged Mark's kindness and consideration towards Sarah, expressing admiration for their relationship. She mentioned feeling fortunate to witness such a loving connection and admitted to fantasizing about being in Sarah's position. Linda acknowledged Mark's remarkable weight loss of 118 lbs to make Sarah happy and his transformation into a hunk. She conveyed her admiration for him and expressed a desire to have a man like him in her life. At precisely 4 p.m., as planned, Mark walked out onto the pool deck, observing the presence of Sarah and the three women. He greeted Sarah and commented on the women's improved tans. Mark playfully remarked on the women's beautiful bodies, suggesting they might give him a hard time. He encouraged Sarah to join in the playful banter and jokingly asked why she hadn't removed her top. Sarah, upset by the afternoon's events, reluctantly complied. Mark then posed 2 questions to Sarah, emphasizing the need for honest answers. He inquired if, at any point during their marriage, she had cheated on him. Sarah firmly denied any infidelity. Mark pressed further, specifically mentioning Tony from the gym. Sarah maintained her denial, expressing confusion about where such an idea originated. Mark continued to question Sarah about her involvement with Tony, mentioning their regular Wednesday meetings and Friday afternoons when he played golf. Despite Mark's detailed knowledge of her affair, Sarah, shocked, stuck to her denial, hoping he lacked concrete evidence. Each of the women present, Brenda, Sally, and Linda, sat with satisfied grins, anticipating the unfolding revelation. Mark proceeded to expose the evidence he had gathered, including phone logs from both the landline and Sarah's cell phone. He described the pattern of calls, pointing out the regularity of her contact with Tony. Mark even had Brenda call the number, confirming it belonged to Tony. Although Mark didn't possess pictures of Sarah and Tony together, he expressed his conviction that the weekly calls were not innocent. In shock, Sarah realized the extent of Mark's knowledge, understanding that their relationship was about to face significant challenges. As she attempted to respond, Mark intervened, stating that there was little to be said and nothing that could convince him of her innocence. Despite his deep love for her, Mark admitted that his current emotions, hurt, disgust, and anger, outweighed his love. Mark introduced the three women, Sally, Linda, and Brenda, explaining their connections to him. He described Sally as a longtime work associate, acknowledging her beauty and sweetness. Mark disclosed that he was aware of Sally's crush on him, but he never acted on it out of respect for his marriage to Sarah. Sally smiled, recognizing their genuine friendship. Linda's acquaintance with Mark began during their visits to Grisham's when she served them. Mark revealed Linda's fantasy of being with them, emphasizing her admiration for him. He complimented Linda's physical attributes, particularly praising her chest. Mark expressed his intention to indulge in the experience with Linda. Brenda, the newest acquaintance, was introduced as a seasoned bartender who showed empathy and compassion during a conversation about Mark's distress at Grisham's. Mark highlighted Brenda's assistance in obtaining information and forming a connection with her. As Mark spoke, Sarah teetered on the edge of a breakdown. Visibly emotional, tears flowed, and her breathing became erratic. Despite her desire to convey something to Mark, she remained silent. Mark, acknowledging the interest expressed by the three women, revealed his anticipation of enjoying carnal encounters with them, exploring sensuality in every aspect. However, he reiterated his commitment to not be unfaithful in his marriage and expressed the need to end the marriage with Sarah to pursue these relationships. Mark conveyed his reluctance to violate his pledge and asserted that terminating the marriage was the only solution. Brenda produced divorce papers from her bag and informed Sarah, a bartender by night and a process server by day, that she was being served. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotions, broke into tears at the delivery. In an attempt to plead with Mark, she apologized profusely and expressed her love, pleading with him to reconsider. Mark responded, expressing doubt about Sarah's love, citing her actions over the past 2 years as evidence. He emphasized that the issue went beyond a couple of instances, believing it occurred over 100 times. The court hearing was set for next Friday, and after the legal separation, Mark planned to commence relationships with the three women. He suggested that indulging in pleasures with them might help him find forgiveness for Sarah's affair with Tony and understand the satisfaction it brought her. Mark expressed the hope that a lasting connection with the new relationships could provide the love and support he had believed he had with Sarah. Mark informed the three women that it was time for them to leave, assuring them that he would be in touch individually. He then went into the house to gather a few belongings, preparing for a stay at a hotel until Friday, when either he or Sarah would officially move out. Unable to form coherent thoughts, Sarah remained seated by the pool, now crying softly. Mark emerged through the patio doors, placed his suitcases down, and approached her. Sarah wasn't sure what more he had to say, but it quickly became evident. Mark reminded her of the consequences he had forewarned for her lover. As it turned out, when she supposedly canceled on Tony the previous day, he pursued a relationship with the well-endowed blonde coworker he warmed up with every Wednesday morning from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., his prelude before their rendezvous. It seems Brenda, Sally, and Linda will have a similar effect on Mark, hoping it transforms him into a love-making god for them. By the way, the blonde was Gino Margarella's wife. Gino took offense to Tony's involvement with his wife, and he, along with a couple of his associates, subjected Tony to a severe beating. Tony's face is now a mess, with a few remaining teeth and some broken ribs. Gino even allowed Mark the privilege of delivering a significant blow to Tony's groin. The outcome? It's doubtful Tony will produce any more hot seed. And there's skepticism about his ability to engage in lovemaking activities again. Mark, of course, will deny any involvement in Tony's fate. Moreover, Friday being his golf day conveniently provides Mark with an alibi through his brother and friends. Wishing Sarah a great life, Mark informed her they would meet in court the following Friday. That day, Sarah was left alone in tears. Within the next 2 hours, she packed her bags and headed to her mother's place. The divorce process took 7 months, leaving Sarah devastated and sinking into deep depression. Contrary to what he claimed about the other ladies, Mark had no intention of following through. Instead, he found solace in 2 golden retrievers and ultimately discovered unconditional true love.
I secretly went to my wife's office to surprise her on our 10-year anniversary, only to greeted by this. Unthinkable. With the rain we have had, we have crazy hours trying to make up time that we missed. So I work 12 hours on the days it's nice, sometimes a little longer. If it's raining when I get up, I don't go in. Some days we get sent home when it starts, too dangerous. I usually hit the gym for an hour or two. Thursday we start at 6 a.m. Mid-morning starts to rain hard. We go home. I go to the gym as usual. I cut the workout short and head downtown to see my wife Megan to give her flowers and make plans for dinner that night if possible. We really haven't seen much of each other this week. I went to bed around 9 p.m. She wasn't home. Called me earlier. She's working late. Not unusual for the past month. I stopped and got some flowers and went into her building about 12:30. Nicole was at the receptionist desk. I told her I got here later than I wanted and asked if she could put the flowers on Megan's desk. She said, "I don't think they went to lunch yet. Why not drop them off yourself?" She buzzed the door to get back to the offices. The place was deserted. I went to her office. The door was closed. I always walk in unless the receptionist tells me she's in a meeting. I walk in and some guy is standing behind her, nuzzling her neck. She's reaching back over his head. She's giggling only as she can, saying, "We gotta get this done."
I am gut punched.
I slammed the flowers down and said, "Happy anniversary," and walked out. I didn't hear what she said. Nicole said goodbye and left. Made it to the elevators and out the building. Then my phone started ringing. I boiled my eyes out all the way home. Went into the garage, pulled my camping gear out of the rafters, and took off. I drove about 2 hours to a state park. I had no idea what to do. I just had to run. I hiked a trail we've been on in the past, about a 3-hour hike. I don't drink much, so I had no booze. I just sat there thinking. Looking back, I am glad I was in a rush.
Normali, I bringa 45 cal.
With me camping, we have black bears, which generally scare off, but get aggressive if hungry or cubs are around. The way I was feeling, I might have eaten the barrel that night. My phone was blowing up for Megan, so I had turned it off. I left the park to get reception and turned it on to see my good friend called. I called him back. He said Megan called him to check on me, make sure I didn't do anything stupid. We talked a bit, told him I got to thinking this through, and would catch up on Friday. So while I am thinking about this, I go over our marriage from the beginning to see what I missed. We come from completely opposite backgrounds. My grandfather raised me with my mom. He taught me about life. He had a little saying about everything. He told me marriage would be the hardest job I ever had. He had to work on it every day. God, I miss him. We did not have much. Heard Mom and Grandpa having many discussions about bills. They worked hard, and my brother and I did not miss out on anything we knew of. Megan was born into money. Not overly rich, but very comfortable. Went to a great college, always had great clothes, a new car, etc., and she is beautiful. 11 out of 10 beautiful. I would joke with her if she coughed about the silver spoon getting stuck in her throat. We met and started dating. I was dumbfounded how such a woman would ever be with me. We dated quite a while before she told me about her parents and lifestyle. Our friends called us the model couple because they thought we were so good looking we had to be models. Families were not as kind. Afraid of the differences economically would come into play. Her dad and I started to get along, but her and my mom took some convincing. We graduate and get her first job. We plan on getting married. We work out between us that we would expose each other to our lives that we live. I took her white water rafting. She took me to the symphony. We went ziplining. We went to an art opening, etc. We agreed that we had to experience the other's interests. She was really enthused about the more physical things we did. I kind of like this symphony and such. I own 2 tuxedos now. I look back and do not see any red flags. Her first 2 jobs she quit because the men all tried to get in her pants. She was paraded out in front for photo ops. Invited a conference as when other newbies were not. At dinner at a conference, a partner tried to get her drunk, then tried to force himself into her room that night. She quit. The next job, the same thing. Quit again. This 3rd job has women as some of the partners, and none of that BS is in her workplace. She seems very happy. We seem very happy. So now, Friday, I am home. I called her. Asked where she was. Back at work. I, being in a smart-ass mood, Said that the marriage is taking second place for her job. She responded since I would not talk about what she was doing. Fair enough. She will be home in an hour. So I wait. I want to save our marriage. If I am lacking in providing, then I want to fix it. I want to ask why, of course, but I cannot accept an I don't know answer. Here's the update. Wife and I had a marathon talking session on Friday late night. I started by asking that she be honest in all answers and be complete. Do not tell me half-truths that have to be asked several different ways to get a complete answer. She agreed. I started with why. Answer. I don't know. Kind of what it was expected. We went around and around on this. Finally, I said, how many times did you have sex? Started to dodge, but when I let out a sigh and shook my head, she said 6 or 7 times. That started things rolling. I kept my cool. How long? Last 3 weeks. Back to why. Could not give an answer. You still love me? Yes. Saying it because we are done trying to save the marriage? No, with some conviction. Do you find me attractive? Yes. Why? Still can't answer. Am I not giving you something you were looking for? Here she hesitated, but quickly recovered. I knew I was onto something. Could not crack the nut though. Finally, about midnight, I was tired. I said, Megan, you are an intelligent woman. I cannot believe you cannot articulate the why I am asking about. She started crying, saying she is trying to answer my questions. I said, okay, enough for tonight. Time for bed. She started to walk toward the door. I asked where she was going. To my parents' house. I told her that this is our house. I'm not asking you to leave. She's up crying at that point. I said, we are not divorced or separated. That may come, but for now we need to be together until we sort this out. We actually slept in the same bed. Not sex in case you were going to ask. I am up almost most of the night. I am reading some of the comments in DM. Had some great comments and back and forth with a few people. One told me that women generally marry up in social status. We were unusual, maybe second thoughts. One suggested that maybe I was right and that I was not fulfilling something for her. But one told me that there was a post a few days ago describing this scenario, but from the women's view, asking what she should do. We could not find it on the subs you looked at. /surviving infidelity /infidelity. So I pulled up Reddit and put in Megan's account and looked at her history. Bingo. She was the one who posted. So this morning, bright and early, we start again. I start out, why? Same answer. We go around getting annoyed. Then I say, did this guy challenge you intellectually? The look on her face was priceless. He read my post. For the masses, she described how she caught the feeling when they first kissed in a make-out session in a hotel. She left. Next morning, after I left for work, she hightailed it over to a hotel to put an end to it. Then had sex. It continued at least up to her posting. I am sure a couple of days later, I discovered them. She also was weighing whether to leave. Then says this is moving way too fast. She needs to separate from the guy. So I present this to her that she thinks I'm a dumb hick.
No.
She was attracted to him because this project they are on is his idea. She feels she is getting passed by and needs to up her game. The stimulation from this led to the attraction and the rest. Now, I don't know. I know she was sincere. Now the floodgates open. We have a great dialogue through the issue. Mid-afternoon, she wants a break. She leaves for her parents. So I'm writing this update and knock on the door. Okay, gotta say I'm really tired now. There stands Megan's mom. I tell her Megan is on the way to their house. She knows she wants to talk to me. She has never been to our house by herself. She has never that I remember talked to me privately. She says she is not here to sway me in any way. She would accept any decision I make. But she wants to tell me her story. She was married once before Megan's dad. I knew that. The man she married was the love of her life. Didn't have much. She met her husband and they caught some feelings. Before they cheated, she told the first husband they were done. Divorced. When she married a new guy, he had some money but was an up-and-coming executive. Couple years go by, not happy, made a mistake. All husband moved on and is married. She gets pregnant. As Megan goes into depression, was actually institutionalized. 2 years later, pregnant with brother. Repeat cycle. Couple years later, sister is born. Repeat. No more kids, she's fixed. Everyone thought it was postpartum depression. I guess it was, but it mirrored her ex also expanding his family. To this day, she knows where he lives, his kids' names, etc. She has never gotten over leaving a love of her life. She sees how I am with Megan. She sees she is my love. She saw it when she quit her first job, how I took care of her. She got up and left, saying nothing else. All right, next cheating story. My wife has been cheating since our first-year anniversary. Spoil alert. Me and my wife were married in August of 2019. Things weren't easy. We fought a decent amount, but never to the point where I thought we were in danger of losing each other. We both had our struggles along the way. I have been in active recovery for a porn addiction for over 6 years, while she was starting her therapy journey to address childhood incestuous abuse. I thought we were on the right track. When August 2020 came along, our relationship still had its rough spots, but it was the first year of marriage. It was supposed to be this hard, right? I believe that even though we weren't where we were at least in a better spot than where we started. A couple of weeks into August, my wife became more and more distant. She spent more and more time with her male friends from work. I began to have concerns, but every time I broached them with her, she would lay my fears to rest. You are the one who struggles with lust, not me. I am never one-on-one. I just make better friends with guys, etc. Despite my misgivings, I figured she was right. After all, I was the one who struggled with porn. I needed more boundaries than she did, right? We had the talk early on in our marriage that we wanted to set the boundary of never being in a one-on-one setting with someone of the opposite sex. We wanted to be above reproach. While she did acknowledge this conversation, she didn't think it was necessary for her. That her struggles weren't with sex, and I should be okay with her hanging out with male co-workers. They are all Christian guys working at a Christian restaurant. What could happen? In mid-August, we celebrate our anniversary. During this time, we decided to go on a large group trip where we would rent an Airbnb in the Northern Peninsula. During this trip, a lot of our closest friends came with, including the guy I would come to learn she was having an affair with. During the trip was when my suspicions really ramped up. She was very distant from me and spent more and more one-on-one time with this guy despite my misgivings. Things really came to a head when I came back one night and realized they were out alone in the lake swimming together. It had gotten to the point where even some of her other friends called her out on her behavior. Fast forward on August 30th, D-Day happened. I had been very suspicious by now, and every night when she came home the questions of whatever you've been, who have you been with, what in the suit? I didn't think she was having an affair, but I told her that I believed she was at risk for having an affair. But no one could spend this much one-on-one time in intimate settings with someone else and not develop feelings. Anyway, on the 30th, we were leaving church, and she was again acting very distant. I decided to ask her straight up, "Are you invested in this marriage?" That's when she replied, "We need to talk." She took me to a park and told me what has been happening. She told me it has been going on since the anniversary. She said she loves this guy and does not plan to stop seeing him. That was just about a month ago. In our few interactions since then, she has made it very clear she does not want back in the marriage, even if this guy wasn't in the picture. She told me that if our marriage wasn't already crumbling, that she wouldn't have gone looking. My brain knows that is bogus, but my heart still thinks it is my fault. In the meantime, she has continued to see this guy, post on Instagram about how much she loves him, and tell her friends about how I should have fought for her more. Something worth noting is that she is a manager at this Christian restaurant, and the guy is a new hire. Apparently, her boss is aware and is chosen to forgive her, aka covered up and go against all their values. I never thought I would get a divorce, but the choice is being made for me. Even if she did want to work on things, I'm not sure I could. I'm living with my parents right now, and this is all just too much sometimes. I still wear the ring, not ready to take it off. I know she doesn't, but still, there are times when I feel excited for the future, but other times when just doing basic tasks is too hard. I can't sleep, too many graphic dreams, and I'm just trying to get by. I do have things to keep me busy, and I do have a new job starting in October, which will be helpful, but that is where I'm at. I've found it difficult to find people who can relate. I am thankful for this community. And here's our first update. Going to see a lawyer on Tuesday says it should be a simple process from a logistical standpoint at least. I've gone back to seeing my therapist once a week. She is a counselor who is Christian, but not a Christian counselor, aka doesn't answer everything with just pray about it, or God works in mysterious ways, or any of that BS. We'll bring that stuff into the session if I ask him to, but not uninvited. The restaurant she works at is Chick-fil-A. She always talked about how their Christian values set them apart from other places. And here's the next update. I don't know what the proper format is for posting updates, so someone feel free to correct me if I'm doing it wrong. I found out that she has been telling people that the reason we are separated is because I was abusive. I talked with my lawyer, and he said the only way that would hurt is if she filed for a PPO. And the only way she could do that is if she had concrete evidence. That means no going to her work, contacting her, etc. Yesterday, I got the ring back, which was really difficult. My lawyer will send her documents to sign, and if she doesn't contest anything, we can move forward with scheduling a hearing, which is about a 2-month waiting period. And another update. 30 days till court hearing. A little bit of context. She had locked herself out of the apartment. We are separated living in different places, but she texted asking for my key to get in. She said she was using the landlord's copy, needed mine. I haven't given it back. One last little foo, I suppose. Or maybe that is the last thing I'm holding on to. Like if I'm surrendering that, I'm surrendering the relationship. She's paranoid by her own admission, terrified I'll break into the house. She told me she was buying a gun. I've never been violent with her, never laid a hand on her, and I've assured her numerous times that I wouldn't resort to violence. That being said, the idea of her being afraid, albeit misplaced fear, feels good. Knowing that she knows I have access to her house if I really wanted to, that I still have a way in. I'm choosing to hold on to that, to nurse that. Maybe I just don't want to let her go all the way. Maybe I still love her. I know that's wrong, but I felt so powerless the entire relationship. So yeah, that's where I'm at. The more I think about it, look into it, the more effed up I realize it is. Today's journal was longer than normal. With the hearing coming up, even though I know she is a narcissist and this is the best move, it's still hard and hitting me. Here we are, friends. Didn't edit it or try to organize my thoughts, but this is where I am at today. 11/17/2020. These are the days when it is the worst. When I'm at work and there is literally nothing to do but research and file. The time I have to think. These are the times when I would normally text my wife. Text her telling her how bored I was. Casual crap. What's up to? How's work? Anything new? Blah blah blah. I miss that. The regular stuff. The day-to-day stuff. I forgot how lonely it is to be single. There, I said it. I'm single. 31 days until the court date, and I'm scared. I am really freaking scared. Talk to Scott about the key. Explain that all behavior has a function. This is the only thing I have control over. It makes sense. I never had control during the marriage. I don't have control during the divorce. Handing over the key is giving it up. 100% giving up. I don't want to go home. I don't want to go to work.
I'm struggling.
Really struggling. Having trouble finding something to look forward to. I don't know if I'll come back from this. Scott told me to reclaim my past. Reclaim my reality. Not wait for someone else to validate my experience. That's really the reason I'm writing the letter. To get acknowledgement from her. For her to give me permission to have my reality. I don't let myself have it if it can't be justified or validated by someone else. I'm on a roller coaster. I'm in a glass box of emotion.
I'm insane.
The silence, as long as something is going on at every moment of the day, then the pain is manageable. I'm not busy. I'm with my thoughts. With my brain. I hate my brain. I feel between a rock and a hard place. I've begun to really dig into the research. Right now, I have over 26 peer-reviewed articles related to narcissism, childhood sexual abuse, and its relation to infidelity. Attachment styles and infidelity, infidelity in the first year of marriage, sexual abuse leading to narcissism, narcissism and infidelity, long-term impact of betrayal trauma, characteristics of cheaters, archetypal hypocrites, characteristics of people most likely to be cheated on, etc. Maybe one day I'll make sense of this. Maybe this will be the biggest freaking research paper I've ever done. Maybe I will be able to conclusively come away from this experience and say, this is why it happened. I'm going to try and perform an autopsy on the corpse that is our marriage. I won't lie, My intention is to definitely point out her fault, to unequivocally convince the jury of my innocence and her role in disintegrating our marriage.
I'm heated.
As I cool down, the hope is that I will be able to better look at my stuff, too, because it's there. As much as I hate to admit it, it is. I think the main reason I feel a need to prove the pain is because she has yet to truly validate it. I have not had a single conversation with her where she did not attempt to explain away, gaslight, justify, twist the truth, displace, or rewrite the narrative. I've been on lawyer mode, on a witness stand. I spent all of last year being cross-examined, and even though we have cut off contact, she is still a leech in my mind. I find myself doubting the institution of marriage, doubting values that I've held just as fundamental truth for so long. I don't see the point in waiting until marriage. I don't see the point in taking the step. I don't see the point in taking the risk. Maybe I do, but the risk and potential for failure is too great. I was certain, freaking certain she was the one. I thought I had dodged a bullet with my last fiancée. Maybe I just traded her on in for a rat poison. One is gross, the other one kills you. Who knows? The one could have been worse, probably would have been, but the point is my judgment is screwed. How can I be certain of anything when the thing I was 1000% sure about is a lie? My mom asked me if I ever saw myself getting married again, moving on. Right after she asked, she realized it was too soon for the question. Don't get me wrong, it definitely was. I'm not ready to remotely consider moving on, but if I had to answer now, I would say no, I am not getting married again. What am I going to tell everyone? Hey guys, welcome back. This has been hell. This has been the worst. Being in a situation where there is even a risk of this happening again seems unfathomable. It's like having an explosion strapped to my chest. Even if there was only a 10% chance of it going off, there's still a chance. I wasted a freaking ball or wedding on her. It's supposed to be a one-and-done thing.
No.
Right now, I don't think I'm meant for marriage. I was certain. My certainty is shaky. My certainty is unreliable. My certainty is nothing more than I guess. I'm certain of nothing. I'll never be certain of another woman. Marriage doesn't require certainty. It requires faith and trust. Yeah, I freaking know. But I believed in us and trusted her so much that it surmounted to something equivalent of certainty in my mind. I trust too much.
Husband took nuclear revenge after discovering his cheating wife had a secret child. Temporary duty assignments TDY can sometimes be fun and exciting, but this one was not. It was 30 days of almost round-the-clock hard work. Every year, the U.S. Army participates in a rapid deployment exercise. Several units from across the Army are selected to participate and are airlifted, along with all their equipment, to Germany where they engage in a month-long exercise with their NATO counterparts. My name is Fred Sadler. At the time, I was a relatively new captain in the U.S. Army, working in the Operations Division stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. This deployment came at the worst possible time for me to be anywhere other than home with my wife, who was pregnant and due to deliver sometime during the deployment. Lydia and I had been married for almost 6 years when the deployment began. My commanding officer said, "I give you a personal guarantee that I will do everything in my power to get you home before the baby is born." And he did. At the end of the exercise, I packed my things and was about to get on a plane. I called Lydia, who told me she thought she was going to be hospitalized in the next couple of days. "Then the timing must be perfect because I'm on my way home," I told her. It was dusk. I was driving to the airport when a deer ran out into the road. My driver swerved to avoid it, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a military hospital in Frankfurt. My right arm, right leg, and 3 ribs on my side were broken, and my right lung had collapsed. "How long have I been here?" I asked my nurse. 5 days. "Is my wife here?" "No, sir," I called Lydia. "Are you okay?" were her first words. "Don't mind me." "How are you and the baby?" She began to cry. "We lost the baby, Fred. I'm so sorry." "Are you okay?" I asked. "Physically, I'm fine, but emotionally, I'm a mess." 2 weeks later, I was flown home on a medevac airplane. Lydia met me and traveled with me to the Fort Hood Hospital. She was still an emotional wreck, but our time together seemed to help us both. I was in the hospital for another 2 weeks before I was discharged on limited duty. 2 years after we lost our child, we were transferred to Heidelberg, Germany. We spent 3 years there traveling all over Europe. There, I was promoted to major. After 3 years, we were transferred to Fort Lewis, Washington. Being a major, we were given field-grade officers' quarters. They were much nicer than company grade and had garages, not just carports. When we moved into the cabin at Lewis, All the things we took with us to Germany were sent back. We unpacked those boxes as well as the boxes we had stored and did not take with us. Using a box cutter, I opened one of the many boxes and began to take things out of it. It was the box we had stored things in while we were in Germany. About halfway down was a small wooden box that I didn't remember seeing before. I placed it on top of the stack of boxes and opened it. My life changed forever. There was a small stack of envelopes with a pink ribbon around them. I pulled the ribbon away and picked up the top envelope. It was unsealed and I opened it. Inside was an official document labeled birth certificate. As I looked at the document, my mind began to fog up. It stated that a baby girl, weighing 7 lbs 6 ounces and 19 inches long, was born alive. It included the date. It was the same date Lydia had told me our baby was not alive when born. The baby was named Hope. It went on to say that the mother's name was Lydia Jane Sadler, née Johnston. Where the father's name was listed, there was a note that said, unknown. I picked up the next envelope. It, too, was unsealed. I pulled out a multi-page document. It was an adoption certificate. I read it several times. The gist of it was that a child named Hope, born to Lydia Sadler, had been given up for adoption, and all parental rights had been stripped. It went on to say that since the identity of the biological father was unknown, his permission was not required. How many men had she slept with in that time? Did she know? She had to know that even in marriage, we need personal space and thoughts. I drove up to the golf course, parked the car, and headed to the 19th hole, where there was a bar, diner, and restaurant. I ordered 2 eggs over medium heat and corned beef hash. This used to be my favorite breakfast until Lydia changed my eating habits. I managed to eat most of it and sat on the deck while the golfers finished the 18th hole and went inside. When I got home, it was the middle of the day. She had made a lot of progress in taking down boxes and organizing the house. I went to my unit and into the office. There was no one there except the officer on duty. I sat down at my desk and tried to work, but my heart was not in it. When I got home, it was past midnight. She was lying in bed reading. I undressed and took a shower. "I'll sleep downstairs," I announced as I walked out and closed the door. I had just turned on the TV and was getting comfortable on the couch when she walked in, grabbed the remote, turned off the TV and stared at me. "Cut the crap. Tell me what's wrong and I'll either help you or leave. Which is it? I haven't done anything wrong. So I won't tolerate you yelling at me when I'm trying to help or having to get out of your way when you try to run me down." I walked over to her, took the remote from her hands, and turned the TV back on. "Have a safe trip," I said. She left less than an hour later. On Monday morning, I talked to my commander and told him my story. I even showed him the documents. He was as dumbfounded as I was. "What do you plan to do?" he asked me. "I'm not sure." "Did she say where she was going when she left?" "No, sir, but she didn't take all her things, especially the box." There was a pause before I spoke again. I was thinking of trying to find my daughter, if she is my daughter, and proceed from there. It would be virtually impossible. In adoption cases, confidentiality is very important to both parties, he said. "I understand, but I have to do something. I have to start somewhere, and I don't trust her to tell me the truth anymore." Then I literally jumped up. "Oh my God, I have an idea. Can I have the day off?" "Sure." I saluted and ran out of his office and building, into the parking lot where I jumped in my car and drove home. I opened the box, pulled out the wooden box and dumped the contents on the floor. There was a pacifier in there. A pacifier. Hope must have used it before she was taken. I put the box back together, put the pacifier in a clear plastic bag and sealed it. I got on the internet trying to find a DNA lab in the area. There was one in downtown Seattle. I went into the bathroom, but all of Lydia's things were gone. I rummaged through the cabinet under the sink, found her old hairbrush, put it in another plastic bag along with the bag that held the pacifier, and hauled back to Seattle. "We'll call you in about 3 weeks, she said. I didn't hear from Lydia for another whole day. "Hi," I said. "Are you feeling better?" "Better than what?" "Better than the idiot you were a couple of days ago." "No, same old idiot." "Why?" 3 weeks exactly. By then I should know if I'm going to eliminate you or just divorce you." I ended the conversation. The phone immediately rang and I ignored it. The next day when I got home, Lydia was already there. She met my car as I pulled up to the house. She was furious. "What do you mean you're going to either liquidate me or divorce me?" Exactly what I said. "I think I deserve an explanation," she said. "Me too." "About what?" she asked. We were still in the driveway. "You mean you don't need to explain anything?" I asked. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. So there's no hope for us?" I said, putting as much emphasis as possible on the word hope. "What do you mean there is no hope for us? What have I done?" Then it hit her. "Oh my God, no, please no. I'll be back in an hour and you better not be here." I'll leave for work in the morning at 6:30. I'll be back at 5. By then, all your stuff should be out of this house. I left. I came back exactly an hour later and she was gone. And so was the box and some of her things. When I got home in the evening, the house was almost empty. She had picked out almost all the furniture and taken it away. True, she left my favorite chair and a bedroom set for guests. The next morning, I called my office to let them know I would be late. I then called Post Housing and arranged for government furniture to be temporarily brought to my apartment. I also called the credit union, our stockbroker, the insurance company, and anyone else I could think of and went about those mundane housekeeping things that are usually associated with divorce. I then made an appointment with a JAG Judge Advocate General Army lawyer. I knew they were not authorized to represent me in civilian court, but they could advise me. They confirmed what I suspected: she would get half. We lived in public housing, so we didn't own a house, but we had enough equity to buy one if we wanted to. Both our cars were paid off. My life continued for a couple more weeks. I went to work, did my chores, mowed the lawn, and washed and cleaned my car. One morning, the phone rang. "Hello," I answered. "Is that Major Fred Sadler?" "It is Major Sadler. This is Margie from the DNA Analysis Center. A few weeks ago, you gave us some samples to test." "Yes, I did." "Well, the results are in and you can come in and look at them." "Can't you just tell me now?" "No, sir, I can't. We can either mail them to the address you gave us or show them to you in person. We have no way to verify over the phone that you are who you say you are. We have to see identification. We can mail the results because, as you may recall, we asked you for ID when you were here and we were able to verify your address. I'll be there as soon as I can." I walked through their door, introduced myself, and asked for Margie. She came out and we shook hands. She asked to see my identification. "Come with me, please," she said. I followed her into a small room. She asked me to wait. She left and came back a couple of minutes later. She handed me the pacifier and then spoke. "Sample A is yours, Sample B is from the hair you gave us, and Sample C is from the pacifier." We were able to determine that samples B and C are positively related. Sample A is not related to either B or C. "Thanks," I said, took the pacifier, put it in my pocket, took the papers, and left. I got into my car. At least I didn't have a daughter calling some other man daddy, but someone else did. JAG was not authorized to recommend specific law firms or attorneys, but the JAG officer I spoke with was able to provide me with a list of approved attorneys and firms. The next day, I started calling them. I made 6 appointments. At the 3rd appointment, I found my man. He was a retired JAG officer and hated cheating spouses, both wife and husband. I spent over an hour telling him my story. When I got home, it was late. There was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lydia. "Fred, 3 weeks are up. Lydia." Short and to the point. The return address was her parents' address in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I called her. "Hi, Fred," she said. "I won't talk about it over the phone, and I'm certainly not flying to Pennsylvania, so I guess you'll have to come here. If you mean Seattle, I'm already here. I sent a letter last week when I was there. I'll be at the house at 6:30. Come over then," I told her. She hung up. I didn't make any special arrangements. No drinks, no cheese, no crackers, nothing. This was supposed to be a business meeting. I put the DNA documents and my copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers on the government-issued coffee table. She pulled up to the driveway at 6:20 but waited until exactly 6:30 to ring the bell. I was in no hurry to answer it. Opening the door, I invited her in and indicated where she should sit. I sat on the couch. She sat in the uncomfortable straight-back chair across from me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pacifier and held it out to her. She grabbed it and held it to her bosom. "Thank you," she said, as if I'd given her $1 million. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA test results. "You already know I'm not the father, but this will confirm it." She reached for the results and took them with her left hand. The pacifier remained clutched in her right. "I take it you are Sample A?" she asked. "Yes." Then I pushed the rest of the papers toward her without saying anything. She leaned forward, read the title on the top sheet, and tears welled up in her eyes. She set the DNA test results aside and picked up the dissolution of marriage application. She started to read it, but the tears were already flowing freely and falling onto the form, so she set it aside. "Can I have a tissue?" she asked. "I don't have any." "You're not making it easy for me, are you?" she asked. "You cheated," I said. She nodded. "How many times?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I just want to know." "One weekend, different men." "Just one." "Who is he?" "Does it really matter?" "Again, I just want to know. I think I deserve it." "I'm not going to tell you." "Do I know him?" "I'm not going to tell you." "So you'd rather protect him than try to save your marriage?" She picked up the divorce petition. Our marriage is over anyway, why ruin it? Okay, but you have to tell me why you lied about your daughter being not alive when born. When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure if it was your baby or his. I thought about getting an abortion, but I couldn't. Over time, I was able to reason that you can't know for sure if it's your baby or not. When we found out it was going to be a girl, I was even more sure you wouldn't know because there is a special bond between dad and daughter, and I was sure you and her would look alike. As the time of her birth approached, I started to get nervous. Maybe you would find out she wasn't yours. Then you went away on a business trip, and my nerves calmed down a bit. I was glad you wouldn't be around when she was born. Then you told me you were flying home, and I started to get nervous again. My emotions had been on a roller coaster. Maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be there when she's born, maybe you won't. I was nervous. Then she was there, alive and perfect. She was placed on my chest, and I looked at her and fell in love. She was beautiful. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She paused. Just like her father's. You have brown hair and brown eyes. No one in our families has blonde hair and blue eyes. I knew she wasn't yours. She was my daughter, and you were my husband. I loved you both, but I knew I had to choose between you. I chose you. The hospital staff helped me when I told them I wanted to give her up for adoption. Within 24 hours, I had the papers in my hands. They asked who the baby's father was, and I said I didn't know. They said it would be easier that way because if I knew who the father was, they would have to get his permission. I just held her in my arms. She was sucking on a pacifier when they brought me the papers to sign. I knew I had to tell you something, so I made up the lie that she was not alive when born and her remains were cremated. When you came home, I couldn't believe you didn't ask to see the birth certificate, certificate of death, or anything else. I still can't believe it. I trusted you, I said. I had no reason not to trust you. Besides, it was so traumatic that I saw no reason to add to our suffering by looking at those pieces of paper. Eventually, you and I got our lives back to normal, and I was almost happy. But a part of me was missing. It still is, and it gets worse every year on her birthday. I always took the time to pull out her birth certificate, touch her little footprints, and hold her pacifier. There were times when I wanted to put it in my mouth to feel closer to her, but it had some of my dried breast milk on it, and I wanted to preserve it, so I didn't. They must have scraped it off at the DNA lab. Oh my God, it's gone. She groaned, then looked at me. It's gone. Her milk is gone. You idiot, you took her milk. She fell to her knees and literally curled up in a ball on the floor. I picked her up and put her on the couch. I couldn't let her leave in that condition, so I covered her with a blanket and went to my bedroom, but not to bed. She remained there for several hours. At midnight, I heard the toilet flush. I went downstairs. She was sitting on the couch. Would you like some coffee? I asked. Yes, please. She sat down at the counter while I brewed her a cup. She took a sip. I guess I got a little cold feet, huh? Sort of. We sat in silence and drank coffee. More? I asked. Yes, please, she replied. Where are you staying? I asked, brewing 2 more cups. At the motel. You were there for more than 3 weeks. No, I was with my parents most of the time. Do they know the truth? No, I lied to them too. I told them that you and I were going through a difficult time and I needed to get away from you for a while. They paid for me to visit them. They think I came back to help sort out our difficulties. She looked around, walked over to the coffee table, pulled a pen out of her purse, sat down, signed the divorce papers without reading them, and left. When I woke up, it was the middle of Sunday morning. I spent the rest of the day thinking. I took the divorce papers to my attorney on Monday, and he filed them. I've been thinking a lot about who Lydia cheated with. She never told me who he was or how the affair started. It wasn't just that she cheated and got pregnant that made me angry, it was that she defended the idiot and wouldn't tell me who he was. The only thing she told me was that it only lasted 1 weekend. Fortunately, I was so busy at work that I didn't have time to think about anything else. 2 weeks later, I was back at Fort Hood, where Lydia and I were living when her daughter was born. Usually, military seminars are pretty intense, but this one was relaxed. We were divided into groups of 3 to work on a project. It turned out that there were 6 groups of 3, and there were 2 left, a major from Alaska and myself. We developed a close friendship almost immediately. It seemed like we'd known each other all our lives. His name was Keith Franklin, and as I said, he was stationed in Alaska at Fort Wainwright, the coldest base in the U.S. Army. But he loved it there. He was a computer genius, and we were so far ahead of everyone else that we had to slow down and wait for them to catch up. On Friday of the first week, we had lunch at the officers' club. He told me about his personal life. He cheated on his wife, and she divorced him. She is now living with some civilian, and his 2 children call the other man Daddy. Toward the end of lunch, I laid out my story too. When I finished, he had a strange look in his eyes. And you don't know who the man she had an affair with is? No, she didn't tell me. And that was here in Hood? Yes, 5 years ago. It's almost 6. Blonde hair and blue eyes, that's what she said. Come with me. We went to the Manpower Center. Everyone assigned to Fort Hood had to go through it. We walked right into the HR director's office. She saw us, stood up, and went around her desk to give Keith a hug. She looked to be about 60 years old and had a sparkle in her eyes. I liked her, and I hadn't even talked to her yet. Aunt Lucy, this is Fred Sadler. Hi, Fred, she said, shaking my hand. Hello, Mrs. Healy. The nameplate on her desk read Mrs. Healy. I began, call me Aunt Lucy, everyone does. Aunt Lucy, began Keith. Do you remember the fair-haired, blue-eyed officer who may have been here about 6 years ago? She thought for a few seconds. No, but I don't always see everyone who passes through here. They all have to, but that doesn't mean I see them. She thought some more. Fred Sadler, you were here around that time, weren't you? I remember that name. Yes, my wife and I were here, I said. I looked at Keith, as if asking how she remembered that. Keith looked at me. Aunt Lucy has Sam, and she can remember just about anything she's read, seen, or been involved with. That includes people. She can remember everyone she's ever met. Sam? I asked. Yes, superior autobiographical memory. It's a state of being, or a curse, Aunt Lucy interrupted. Or a curse, Keith continued. Very few people have it. Aunt Lucy is Fort Hood's institutional memory, especially when it comes to personnel matters. Isn't that right, Aunt Lucy? Unfortunately. I looked at her, then at Keith, then back at her. You remember everything? Everything that happens to me personally. Jesus, I said. How do you have room for all this? We don't know, it's just always there. Does it have any downsides, I asked? Oh God, yes. I remember the good as well as the bad. It can cause depression if you allow yourself to do that. I can only imagine, I told her. Aunt Lucy, Keith interrupted again. Fred, he pointed at me. He's looking for someone who was here at the same time. The only thing he knows about him is that he was blonde with blue eyes. She laughed. That's it? No height, no weight, no rank, no assignment, not even his initials? No, ma'am, I said. Calling me ma'am is a waste of good oxygen, Fred. I'm Aunt Lucy. Give me time to think and maybe ask around. Does it matter? Keith looked at me and I answered, yes, Aunt Lucy, it's important. Oh, he was about the same age as me when I was here, if that helps, and he was in the Army. Officer or private? I suppose he was an officer. So you don't even know if he was in the service? No, I don't. Or a civil servant? No, I'm sorry, I know it's not much to go on, she laughed. Yeah, there's just nothing to target there. Can't be more than 2,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed men I've encountered in the last few years, but I'll see if I can narrow down the time frame. She took both of our phone numbers. 2 days later, she called Keith. I've been thinking about the man you asked about. I don't remember any blonde-haired, blue-eyed soldiers, either officers or privates, who were about the right age, but I know 2 civilians who work for the Office of Post Engineers. One has worked there for about 30 years, so he's probably too old. The other has been working there for about 10 years. He's in charge of new construction now, but he used to be the head of the plumbing department. His name is Kurt Weber. There are about 15 other blue-eyed blondes on post, but the ages don't fit, and I didn't bother trying to remember civilians living off base because I assumed that when Major Sadler was here, he didn't have time to make many civilian friends. Keith told me, and I immediately started planning how to meet Weber, find out if he was the right man, and maybe get a little revenge. The men who prey on the wives of our military personnel are the second lowest form of life on the planet. The lowest, of course, are those who prey on wives when the serviceman is overseas. These idiots deserve the worst fate imaginable. The next morning, I was sitting on the next street over from Weber's house in my rental car. I was hoping he was golfing or doing some home projects, so maybe he was on his way to the local hardware or lumber store. I'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours when I saw his car pull out of the garage and speed down the street. Thank God, I thought. I didn't feel like sitting here all day to see if he'd gone somewhere, but I was willing to do it if I had to. I followed him to Home Depot. We parked, and I followed him into the store. He was obviously known there because he talked to a few of the employees. There was a spot right in front of the door where there was a coffee bar. I knew enough about Home Depot to know that their regular contractor customers could treat themselves. Weber helped himself and stood sipping his drink while he chatted with one of the salesmen behind the counter. Watching Mr. Weber, I realized one thing. Not only did he have sex with my wife and make her pregnant, but he chewed gum with his mouth open. Other than spitting on the sidewalk, I couldn't think of anything more disgusting. The clerk Weber was chatting with had to go help a customer, so Weber took one last sip of coffee, spit the gum into a paper cup, and walked away, unwrapping another piece of gum. I walked over to the trash can, looked in it, and saw, right on top, a paper coffee cup with a piece of gum in it. I looked around, didn't see anyone, and took the cup. I got in the car and called Keith. I told him what I had. He laughed and told me to hurry back, that he might have something bigger by the time I got there. When I arrived, he was literally jumping from place to place and waving some papers around. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "You won't really believe it." He grabbed my arm. "Look at this." "No, you better sit down." I did. He sat down next to me and put the papers in front of me. "Now look." There were a few names and an address, so I asked, "So what?" "That's Hope's name, address, and her family's name. Her name is Sarah now, Sarah Randolph. I hacked into the files of an adoption agency. Those files are encrypted better than the nuclear missile launch codes carried by the President of the United States." He then stopped and calmed down. "Well, I didn't personally hack their files, my brother did, but it's the same thing." I started to laugh. "That's great, Keith. But what exactly am I going to do with it?" "I have no idea, but you have them. Maybe we can blackmail someone." "Oh, that's great. I can already see the headlines. 2 Army officers tried to blackmail a 6-year-old foster child. That's a great one." He tossed the papers on the coffee table and leaned back in his chair. "Yes, I see where you're going with this." He got a little flustered again. "But we cracked their defenses. That's something." "Yeah, that's something," I said, laughing. I carried the papers and coffee cup back to my block and placed them on the desk. I have no idea why I did it, but I looked up the address where Hope lived and drove there early Sunday morning. It was almost 200 miles to Corsicana. The house was a typical suburban house. I sat outside for about an hour, observing American suburbia on a typical Sunday. The noise of a few lawnmowers, the screams of children, and the chatter of neighbors. No activity came from Hope's house until almost noon. A car pulled up to the driveway. There were 3 people in the car. A man was driving, a woman was in the front passenger seat, and a child was in the right rear seat. The woman got out of the car, closed her door, and reached for the right rear door. I was at the ready with my cell phone. The woman removed the child from the car seat, placed the child on the ground, then knelt down to straighten the baby's dress. I had just enough time to take a few pictures. I heard a noise next to my car. A woman and a child were walking by. "Sarah!" The child next to my car squeaked, and she ran toward the other child, who I realized was Hope, and ran toward her. They were only a few feet away from my car, and I took a few more quick pictures. I started my car and drove off before either of the 2 women became interested in the strange car and man parked on their street. I drove a short distance away and stopped to look at the pictures. 4 were absolutely perfect. I could even make out her blue eyes. I drove back to Fort Hood. The following week, Keith and I finished the course with ease. We graduated on Friday and then had dinner and a few drinks together. Saturday morning, we went to the airport and flew home. Keith to Alaska and me to Seattle. The following Monday was a school day, so I had the day off. I took Lydia's and Hope's DNA reports to the DNA testing center. The lady didn't remember me until I reminded her about the pacifier. I gave her Lydia and Hope's DNA results and handed her the coffee cup with the gum. "See? You in 3 weeks," I said as I left. In fact, it only took 2 this time. She gave me the results over the phone. "It's a married couple, no doubt," she said. "Mother, father, and child." She would send me the official results in the mail. Okay, I had all the information I needed, but what was it for? What was I going to do with it? All it did was confirm that Weber was, in fact, the guy Lydia had cheated with. I went to Walmart and bought paper and envelopes. I also made copies of 2 photographs of Hope and the DNA reports belonging to Weber, Lydia, and Hope. On the DNA reports, I cut off anything that could tell where the report came from. I put it all in an envelope. I made sure I had gloves on from the moment I opened the bag of paper and the box of envelopes, made copies of the photos and DNA reports, and even used self-adhesive stamps and water, not saliva, to seal the envelope. I made every effort to keep it untraceable. I addressed it to Mrs. Kurt Weber at their home address. I also included Lydia's name and her parents' address because I had no idea where she was. Then I drove to Seattle's main post office and dropped the letter in the mailbox. I had no idea what would happen in Texas' home of Fort Hood and the Weber family when the package arrived. The news from Keith was a little over a month old when I got a call from Aunt Lucy. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer," she said. "I'll do my best." "Whatever you're doing isn't good enough. I need complete honesty. Is that what you and Keith did to Weber?" "Aunt Lucy, I don't mean to sound smart, but what did we do to him?" Set him up so his wife would file for divorce. Okay, here's what I did. Keith had nothing to do with it. I told her the truth, most of it anyway. I omitted Keith's part. You certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. Apparently, when his wife received your package, she didn't know if your DNA was his or someone else's, so she did it herself. She took some of his DNA and sent it off for processing. She also sent the profiles of that woman and the baby. They matched, and that's where it all went downhill. Who was the woman he was flirting with? She was my wife, Aunt Lucy. Oh Jesus, I thought it might be something like that. Well, he was brought into the office yesterday and he's not thrilled. He was ranting and raving all over the base. Good hearing from you that his marriage is over is the best news I've heard in a while. I just feel sorry for his family. It was over for me. Lydia and I were divorced and Weber was on the road to divorce. I folded all the papers Keith had given me into a folder and put it in a box with other things I no longer needed but kept anyway. My life was moving on. Over the next few months, I went on a couple of dates, but nothing much happened. 2 years later, I returned to Fort Hood. I was surprised because I expected to be sent overseas like 90% of my classmates. Once in Hood, I found myself in Aunt Lucy's office. How did you get back here? She asked. I have no idea. Yes, came a voice from the past. It was newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel LTC Keith Franklin. He walked into the office, closed the door, and we shook hands. It turned out I needed an assistant, and a major who had just graduated from CGSC was just what I needed, so I asked for him. Keith and I had talked a few times since we arrived at the seminar but hadn't seen each other. I was glad to see my friend. After registering, I took a vacation for 2 weeks. The first thing I did was to look for a house. Lydia and I had been saving up to buy it. I assumed that she would get half of it in the divorce, but since she didn't show up in court, I got everything. The branch manager walked by. He introduced himself as Dwight Randolph. We moved here about 6 months ago and settled in a brand new neighborhood. The houses are very nice and inexpensive. You get a lot of value for your money. He told me this, then went to his office and returned with a business card from the agent whose services he had used. I called her, and it only took me 3 days to find what I wanted. I paid more than half of the down payment, and the bank was happy to finance the rest. I started working with Keith and moved into my new house. The first things I bought were a bed, a chair, a big TV, and a lawnmower. I was spending my first night in my new house. It was already dark outside, and I had no curtains or drapes. There weren't even enough sheets to cover the big front window. I had just opened a beer and was holding a slice of pepperoni pizza in my hand when the doorbell rang. I had long since gotten off the no red meat diet Lydia had kept me on. I opened the door, and there stood a woman. "Hi, neighbor," she said. "My name is Samantha Randolph, but everyone calls me Sammy. We live in the neighborhood. We haven't lived here long ourselves, and I just wanted to say hello, introduce myself, and tell you that if you need anything, just ask. Is your wife here?" I smiled. "Fred Sadler, no wife, divorced." I saw her frown. "But don't worry, I don't throw loud wild parties or even soft wild parties." She smiled. We chatted for a few more minutes before she left. The first week in my new home flew by. On Saturday morning, 3 women rang the doorbell and brought food. They also brought decorating ideas. They had seen my empty house with the lights on at night as I sat in it with nothing but a chair, TV, beer, and pizza. They decided it was time to help me. The ringleader was Sammy Randolph. A couple of hours later, I had a slightly worn but nice leather couch, a dining table and chairs, and a small coffee table to keep the pizza off the floor. The ladies were about to leave when 3 small children came running in, chasing each other. One of the ladies, Ruth, grabbed 2 of the children, and Sammy grabbed the third. "Calm down, Sarah," she said, kneeling beside the child and brushing her blonde hair away from her blue eyes. "This is our new neighbor, Major Sadler." "Hello," she said confidently. "My name is Sarah." I leaned over. "Hi, Sarah," I said, looking into her piercing blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes. I shook my head. "How old are you, Sarah?" "I'll be 7 soon." I stood up and we all said our goodbyes. As soon as they left, I went to the room that was to be my den, found the right box, opened it, and pulled out a folder. In it were the pictures I had taken. It was the same baby. I hadn't paid attention to the names of the parents before, but now I did. The adoption papers named Dwight and Samantha Randolph as Hope's adoptive parents. Sammy and her friend mostly decorated my house. It took a few weeks, and when it was done, we had a neighborhood open house. Sammy invited her sister-in-law, Joni Payne, who happened to be divorced. Oh, I hadn't enjoyed female companionship in a long time, and Joni and I hit it off right away. She was the last to leave the party, and I couldn't wait to call her. The next day, we met for lunch and had dinner with Dwight, Sammy, and Sarah. Sarah was brief because she wanted to go play with her friends. Over the next few months, we were together as often as possible. The first night we spent together was very good. We were sitting at the kitchen island when the doorbell rang. I threw on my robe and went to answer it. It was Sammy. "Good afternoon, Fred," she said as she walked inside. We were wondering. She saw Joni. "Well, what do we have here?" she asked, heading toward her sister-in-law. Joni was sitting on a stool, eating a ham and cheese sandwich. As Sammy approached her, she set the sandwich aside and turned to face her sister-in-law. Her robe was open, and Sammy reached up to close it. Joni laughed. "Too late for modesty, sis. He's already seen everything. In fact, Never mind," Sammy said. I left the room and went upstairs to get dressed. When I came back, they were still discussing my bedspread. When they saw that I was dressed, they fell silent. The following weekend, Dwight and Sammy asked Joni to watch Sarah while the two of them went out to dinner. We were in the backyard watching Sarah in her sandbox. Without looking at Joni, I said, "She's a beautiful child, isn't she?" "Yes, she is." "Did you know she was adopted?" "Really?" "Yes, they've had her since she was born. According to the adoption agency, the birth mother was married, had an affair with a man she doesn't even remember, and got pregnant. Her husband was in the military. She didn't want him to find out about her affair, so she gave Sarah up for adoption. Dwight and Sammy were there to take her home. Sarah is the name her own mother gave her." "No, that name was Hope. It's on the birth certificate, but Sammy and Dwight changed it. Sarah suits her better." "What happened to the birth mother and her husband?" "I have no idea. The adoption agency closes their files very tightly. They don't give the birth mother access to information about the adoptive family and vice versa." Sarah came over and wanted to sit on Joni's lap. She leaned her head against Joni's and fell asleep almost immediately. A few minutes later, Joni asked me to carry Sarah into the bedroom and put her to bed. It was my first time touching her, and I felt very uncomfortable. I gladly laid her down. 7 months later, Joni moved in with me. A year after that, we were married. We had a very happy year until the Army intervened. We were told we were being sent to Germany for 3 years of service. We took 2 trips to the States, one when her father and Dwight's father died, and the other for the reunion. Both times, of course, we saw Dwight and Sammy. We saw Sarah at the funeral, but when we went back for the reunion, she was at camp. After 3 years, we received orders to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was going as a new LTC assigned to the post headquarters as an executive officer under the post commander. This was normally a position for a colonel, not a junior lieutenant colonel, but I didn't mind. In the military world, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. To help me get settled in, the staff organized a series of briefings with the various departments that support the post. One of the briefings was to be given by a post engineer. Representatives from that department, as well as the post engineer himself, were already in the conference room when I arrived. I sat down in my seat at the table and watched as a blue-eyed civilian stood up to begin his speech. His hair was slightly blonde but with a touch of gray. He introduced himself as Kurt Weber. I just stared at him. He had been talking for an hour, and I hadn't heard a word, and my gaze never left his face. It was obvious that he was uncomfortable with me looking at him. At the end of his speech, he asked if I had any questions. "Tell me, Mr. Weber, have you ever been to Fort Hood?" "Yes, sir. I was in the engineering department." "Did you like it there?" "Yes, sir. Why did you leave?" "It's rather personal, sir." "You are correct." I withdraw the question. "I'd just like to know about the people I work with. I seem to recall a scandal at the Fort Hood Engineering Department a few years ago." "Do you know anything about that?" "I vaguely recall something about one thing. There was someone cheating, if I remember correctly." "Ah, well, I just remembered something. Thanks for the briefing. If you need anything at headquarters, feel free to contact me." "Just in case you forgot," I pointed to the name tag on my uniform. "My name is Sadler, Sadler, Fred Sadler. I wouldn't want you to forget it." I was still looking straight into his eyes, and I could see the light. Bulb turn on and his eyes get huge. Kurt Weber became several different colors, ranging from red to pale gray. I got up and walked away. In the afternoon, I learned that Mr. Kurt Weber had requested a transfer. Unfortunately for him, this request had to go through me. When I received it the next day, I wrote in large letters, "Response, I have plans that involve Mr. Weber's expertise. He will play a key role in the realization of these plans." The next day, to the surprise of almost everyone, Mr. Kurt Weber tendered his immediate resignation. I signed it. Every day, I fell more and more in love with Joni. I watched her become increasingly beautiful and hot. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw an aging, middle-aged man, wondering what she saw in me. But whatever it was, I was grateful for it. We cherished our time together, and years flew by much faster than I wanted. We were stationed in Alaska and traveled to Killeen to visit Sammy and Dwight. On our first evening, they told us about a decision they had made with Sarah, who was almost 18. She had always known she was adopted and was now interested in finding her biological parents. Dwight and Sammy supported her decision, but the adoption agency offered no help, citing compliance with the law. All we heard that first day was how outdated the laws were and how they needed reform, especially since it's important for an adopted child to know their birth parents' health status. They decided to use a website dedicated to DNA and ancestry. They sent Sarah's DNA and waited to see what happened. Sarah hoped her biological mother could attend her high school graduation, but since it was only a couple of weeks away, they doubted it would happen. That night, Joni and I were already in bed when she asked, "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About Sarah." "What about her?" "Come on, Fred, married couples don't have secrets, or shouldn't have any. I found your little file 6 months after we were married. She can avoid DNA testing if you tell them everything you know." "Oh crap," I said. "Yeah, oh crap. Why have you been silent all these years?" "I'm not sure. I guess I knew how sensitive you'd be about it, and Dwight and Sammy didn't need to know, so I kept quiet. But now it's become important, and you have to address it. Any suggestions on how I can do this?" "Just tell the story, I suppose. How do you think they'll take it?" "Dwight is my brother and just like me, so he'll take it normally. Sammy is the dark horse." "Okay, tomorrow we'll get Sarah out of the house and tell them." She leaned over and kissed me gently. "Do I ever bore you?" she asked. "What a silly question," I said. "Of course you don't. Why did you even ask?" "Because you haven't touched me all day." I grinned and reached for the buttons on her pajamas. "I can fix that right now." The next morning was Sunday. Sarah was picked up by her best friend, and they went to the mall. I gathered the four of us around the table, took a deep breath, and began. I started by telling them that Joni and I had packed our things before we went downstairs so we were ready if they wanted to kick us out. They looked at us, and Joni shrugged. "Sarah doesn't need to give DNA to find her biological parents." "I know who they are," I said. The looks they gave me made it clear I needed to explain, so I told them the whole story. When I finished, I took a deep breath and looked around the table. Dwight just stared at me while Sammy had tears in her eyes. After a few seconds, she stood up, walked over to me, took my hands, pulled me into a hug and said, "Oh, poor guy, living with that all these years and not being able to talk about it. No one deserves that." She hugged me again. "What do you think, Dwight?" she asked her husband. "I'm trying to calculate the probability of how we all ended up together. I don't think there's a big enough number." "So what do we do now?" asked Sammy, returning to her chair. "I think Fred should contact his ex-wife and invite her to the graduation, since Sarah wants her there," Joni said. "Yeah, why me?" I protested. "Because you started it," Dwight grinned. "But who's going to contact Weber?" "Not me," I said, and told him about the last time I saw him. "You never told me that," Joni said. "I didn't realize you knew the whole story, did I?" She leaned over and kissed me. I love this woman, I thought. Later that day, when Sarah returned, Dwight and Sammy told her about it. She was both nervous and excited and wanted us to continue. The only way I knew to contact Lydia was through her parents, if they were still alive, if they still lived in Mechanicsburg, and if they still had a landline. I waited until Monday morning and talked to a private investigator. I asked him to help me find Lydia's parents and Kurt Weber. It took him 2 hours to get the parents' phone number. It took longer to find Weber. I called Lydia's parents, reminded them who I was, and told them I needed to talk to Lydia. I gave them my phone number to give to her. Not an hour later, my phone rang. "Hello, this is Lydia Bowman." I was given this number. "Hi, Lydia." "Fred?" "Yeah." "How's it going?" she asked, trying to think of something clever to say, but I couldn't. "Actually, I'm doing great. How are you?" "Very well, Lydia. I need to talk to you about something very important." "Okay, go ahead." "Not over the phone. Tell me where we can meet and we'll talk in person." "Explain it to me. We haven't spoken in years, and suddenly, out of the blue, you have something so important that it needs to be discussed in person?" "That's it?" "I'm sorry, Fred, I'm not buying it." "Okay, but remember I gave you a chance." "A chance at what?" "Come on, Fred, what's the matter?" "Only in person, Lydia. Call me if you change your mind." Wait, okay, damn it, we live in Vegas." "That's better. I'm flying out there tomorrow, and I'll call you when I land. You decide where you want to meet." The next day, we met in the lobby of the Bellagio Hotel. I guess she needed a lot of witnesses. "Hi, Lydia." "Hello, Fred. This is my husband, Roland Bowman." "Hi, Roland." I turned my attention back to Lydia. "I need to see you alone for 10 seconds. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Roland. Whatever you say, but this is about the hope you had." She turned pale. "Can we still talk?" Yes, he knows about her. Okay, let's sit down. We found as quiet a corner as we could, given where we were. I recommended something to drink. Wine will do. We agreed to a red, and I ordered it. We let the waiter pour our glasses. I paid for the wine, and we all took a sip. Her name is Sarah. She is graduating in 2 weeks and wants you to be there. Roland and I watched her faint with a glass of wine in her hand, not spilling a drop. Roland took the glass, set it down, and patted her cheeks until she came to. What did you say? I repeated it, then pulled out Sarah's picture and showed it to Lydia. She started crying, gently touching the picture. She's beautiful. Where did you get this? I took it yesterday in her living room. You took it? How? Why? I told her the whole story from beginning to end, including our failed attempt to find Kurt Weber. She didn't know I knew his name and was shocked again. Initially stunned, she quickly grew really angry. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep her from me all these years? Her voice got louder and louder. Roland jumped up. Calm down, calm down. You gave up all rights to her. Fred is breaking the law by doing this now, so chill out. She calmed down. When can I see her? At her graduation if you want to come. Of course I'll come. Can't I see her sooner? You both need time to get used to it. Take your time. How about we get there the day before? She smiled. That would be wonderful. Now, how about I take a picture of you so she can see what you look like? Okay. We found a spot outside for her to pose. When I started to leave, she rushed over, hugged me, and kissed my face and head. Not too demonstrative, is she? Roland asked, laughing. I decided I liked him. That same afternoon, I flew back to prepare Sarah. I showed her a picture of Lydia. She's beautiful, Sarah said. She was very nervous, but excited at the same time. For the first time since I'd known her, she hugged me. Thank you, Uncle Fred. Now we know where you get your beauty, said Sammy, snuggling tightly against Sarah. Do you know what my birth father looks like? Sarah asked timidly. The other 3 adults looked at me with widened eyes, waiting to see what I would say. I thought for a moment before I spoke. Let me tell you that. You got your blonde hair and blue eyes from him. The 3 adults breathed a sigh of relief. We had only taken a week's vacation, so I had to go back to Alaska. But Joni stayed behind to help everyone prepare for the big day. I left for Alaska, promising to be back 2 days before graduation. The day before I was due back in Killeen, I got a call from the private detective. The most he'd been able to find out about Weber was that after leaving government service, he'd taken a job as a consultant to the government of a Middle Eastern country. Like several other American consultants, he disappeared shortly after arriving in country and has not been seen since. I met Lydia and Roland at the airport and drove them straight to Sarah's house. When we entered, she was standing in the middle of the living room. I let Lydia go first. They looked at each other for a long time, then Lydia spoke. I brought you this, she said, pulling out a pacifier. It belongs to you, and I thought you might want it back.